There are mornings that feel like every other morning. And then there are mornings that quietly, invisibly, without a single sign or omen, become the last ordinary morning someone will ever have. This is one of those mornings. If you've been with this channel for a while, you know how these stories usually go. Naruto wakes up. Naruto eats instant ramen for breakfast because he can't be bothered to cook anything else. Naruto complains about Sasuke, gets scolded by Sakura, and dreams, always dreams, about the day he'll wear the hat and the robes of the Hokage and have the whole village look at him and finally sees something other than the fox sealed inside his gut. But what if that dream was about to be replaced by something so much bigger, and so much stranger, that Naruto himself wouldn't recognize his own life by the end of this chapter? Before we get into it, if you're new here, welcome. This is a full what-if reimagining of the Naruto universe, and today we're asking one of the strangest questions this channel has ever tackled. What if, instead of climbing toward the Hokage's chair one C-rank mission at a time, Naruto Uzumaki was handed an entire nation? Not a village. Not a headband. A throne. Hit subscribe and ring that notification bell if you want to see where this goes, because trust me, this is a 10-chapter arc, and chapter 1 alone is going to rewrite everything you thought you knew about where this story starts. Let's begin. The sun over Konohagaku rose the same way it always did, lazy, orange, spilling gold over the Hokage monument like it had nowhere better to be. Somewhere in the lower district, a rooster that belonged to nobody in particular crowed at exactly the wrong time, 3 hours after everyone else's rooster had already done its job. And in a cramped, cluttered apartment above a closed noodle stand, Naruto Uzumaki was doing what he did most mornings, losing an argument with his own alarm clock. 5 more minutes, he mumbled into a pillow that had seen better decades. Just 5. He did not get 5 minutes. He got 0 minutes, because the moment his eyes cracked open, he remembered what day it was, and every trace of sleep evaporated like steam off fresh miso broth. Today was the day team assignments would be posted. Today was the day he'd find out who he'd be stuck with for the rest of his shinobi career. Please, not Sasuke. Please, not Sasuke, though some small, traitorous part of him kind of hoped it would be Sasuke. If only so he'd have someone worth competing against. Today was one more step on the long, winding staircase toward the only title Naruto had ever wanted since he was old enough to understand what the word Hokage meant. He didn't know it yet, but that staircase was about to be pulled out from under him, and something else, something far stranger, was about to be built in its place. He got dressed in the same orange jumpsuit he always wore, because subtlety was a lesson Naruto Uzumaki had simply never been taught, and honestly, would you want him any other way? Grabbed a granola bar because there was no time for a real breakfast, and sprinted out into the street like the building was on fire. Now here's a question for you, watching this right now. If you found out tomorrow that you were secretly the last living heir to a throne you never knew existed, what's the first thing you'd do? Would you believe it? Would you run? Would you refuse? Naruto didn't get to consider that question yet. But somebody else, several miles away, already had. The fire capital sits a good distance from Konoha, past several days of hard travel through cedar forest and open farmland, in a palace compound old enough that its foundation stones predate the hidden leaf itself. It is the seat of the Fire Daimyo, the feudal lord under whose banner Konoha, and every shinobi in it, technically serves. Most genin never think about the daimyo at all. He is a name on old scrolls, a distant signature on trade agreements. A rich noble somewhere who occasionally sends missions with too much gold attached and too little sense behind them. But on this particular morning, in a private chamber deep inside that palace, an old man lay very still on a low bed surrounded by court physicians who had run out of things to try. The Fire Daimyo, Lord Hachiro, 73 years of age, a man who had ruled Fire Country through 3 shinobi wars without ever once picking up a kunai, had been fighting a fever for 11 days. On the 12th, he stopped fighting. There was no dramatic death scene. No last grand speech. Just a quiet exhale in a quiet room, and a chamberlain stepping outside to inform the assembled court officials, in the flattest voice he could manage, that Fire Country's ruler had died in his sleep. By midday, a messenger hawk was already screaming through the sky toward Konohagaku, carrying a scroll sealed in wax the color of dried blood, addressed to one man and one man only. Hiruzen Sarutobi. The third Hokage had seen a great many things in his long life. He had watched villages burn. He had buried students. He had made decisions in war rooms that haunted him decades later in the quiet hours before dawn. He liked to think, at this point, that very little could genuinely surprise him anymore. He was wrong. The messenger hawk arrived at the Hokage tower a little after noon, and Sarutobi broke the wax seal himself, alone in his office, pipe smoke curling toward the ceiling in slow gray ribbons. He read the first line. Then he read it again. Then he set the scroll down on his desk very, very carefully, the way a man sets down something he's afraid might explode if handled roughly. Lord Hachiro is dead. The line of succession has been formally reviewed by the court genealogist's office. There is no direct heir. Records indicate an unresolved secondary claim through a lawful marriage compact dated 3 generations prior, connected to the Uzumaki clan of Yuzushiogakure. We request your immediate and confidential counsel, Lord Hokage, before this matter becomes public knowledge. Sarutobi read it a third time. Not because he didn't understand it. Because he understood it perfectly, and understanding it perfectly was the problem. He knew exactly what that unresolved secondary claim meant, because he was one of maybe 3 people left alive who still remembered the paperwork behind it. Decades ago, in the last years before Yuzushiogakure fell, a formal marriage compact had been drawn up between the ruling family of the Fire Daimyo and a branch of the Uzumaki clan, a political gesture meant to bind 2 allied powers closer together, back when Yuzushio was still a proud, thriving village and not a graveyard of ruins swallowed by the sea. The compact had never been fully honored, because Yuzushio was destroyed before the marriage could take place. But compacts like that, in the old feudal law of Fire Country, don't simply expire because the people involved died. They pass down the bloodline. Quietly. Legally. Waiting. And there was exactly one living person who carried that bloodline now. Sarutobi closed his eyes, and for just a moment, allowed himself to feel every one of his years at once. Kushina, he murmured to the empty room, what did you leave behind for that boy? If you're wondering why this matters so much, why a dusty old marriage agreement from before most of our main cast was even born could possibly upend the entire story, here's the thing about feudal successions. They don't care about ninja rank. They don't care about orphanages or academies or how many bowls of ramen a person can eat in one sitting. Bloodline claims, once activated, override almost everything else. And Lord Hachiro's court genealogists had just discovered, with the kind of horrified thoroughness that only comes from people who really don't want to be wrong about something this important, that the compact traced cleanly and unmistakably to a boy currently enrolled at the Konoha Ninja Academy. A boy who, at that exact moment, was standing in a crowded classroom, craning his neck over Sakura's shoulder to read a team assignment sheet, utterly unaware that his entire future had just been rewritten in a palace he'd never set foot in. Do you see the shape of what's coming yet? Because Sarutobi certainly did. And he did not like it one bit. He summoned his 2 most trusted advisors within the hour, Hamura and Koharu, the aging teammates who had served beside him since before the Second Great War, back when the 3 of them were simply Sarutobi's team instead of the Hokage's council. They arrived to find him standing at the window overlooking the village, pipe unlit, hands folded behind his back in a way that meant he was thinking something he did not want to say out loud yet. You wouldn't have called us in like this over trade tariffs, Koharu said, settling into a chair with the brisk efficiency of someone who had long since run out of patience for suspense. What's happened? Sarutobi turned. He set the scroll from the fire capital on the low table between them without a word. Hamura read it first, his brow furrowing deeper with every line. Koharu read over his shoulder, and Sarutobi watched the exact moment the meaning landed on her face, the widening of her eyes, the slow intake of breath. This is a joke, she said. Tell me this is a joke. I wish it were, Sarutobi said quietly. The genealogists in the capital do not make mistakes of this magnitude lightly. They know precisely what it means to be wrong about something like this, which tells me they are almost certainly right. The boy, Hamura said slowly, like he was testing whether the words would even come out properly. You mean the Uzumaki boy? Naruto. I mean Naruto, yes. Koharu set the scroll down like it had suddenly become too hot to hold. He's 12 years old, Horizon. He hasn't even taken his first C-rank mission, And you're telling me the compact says he's next in line for the Fire Daimyo's own seat? I am telling you, Sarutobi said, that the compact does not care how old he is, or how many missions he has taken, or whether he has ever once in his life eaten a meal that wasn't instant ramen. The law is the law. Kushina Uzumaki's branch of the clan was named specifically in that agreement. Her son is the only living descendant of that branch. There is no one else to contest it. Yuzushiobikure saw to that. Tragically, 13 years before Naruto was even born, the room went quiet. Outside, faint and distant, the sound of academy students filtering out into the courtyard drifted up through the window. Laughter, the scrape of sandals on stone, someone shouting about ramen money. Ordinary sounds, from an ordinary world that was about to stop being ordinary for one specific 12-year-old boy. You could bury it, Hamura said finally, quietly, like he didn't fully believe his own suggestion even as he made it. The records are old. Confidential. No one outside the capital's genealogist office, and the three of us need ever know the compact was found. Sarutobi was already shaking his head before Hamura finished the sentence. Hamura. Old friend. Do you understand what you are asking me to do? To conceal a legitimate claim to Fire Country's throne, a claim belonging to the son of two of our most decorated shinobi, one of whom died protecting this very village, because it is inconvenient, because it complicates our plans for his future, because it endangers him. Hamura shot back, sharper now. Think it through, Hiruzen. The moment word gets out that the Nine-Tails Jinchuriki is also the legal heir to the Fire Daimyo's throne, every enemy of this village gains a second reason to come after that boy. Orochimaru, Akatsuki, whoever they truly are. Every disgruntled noble who thinks they deserve that seat more than an orphan from the Ninja Academy. You would be painting an enormous target on his back that has nothing to do with the fox at all. Sarutobi was silent for a long moment. Because Hamura wasn't wrong. That was exactly the danger. And yet, he already carries one impossible burden that was never his choice to bear, Sarutobi said at last. I sealed the Nine-Tails inside him myself, on the night his parents died, and I have watched this village fail, again and again, to see him as anything but that burden. If this compact stands, if Naruto ascends to the Fire Daimyo's seat, do you understand what that means? It means the boy this village spent 12 years scorning would sit above every council member who ever looked at him with contempt. It means he would command the very samurai forces meant to protect this nation, and control the treasury that funds this village's missions. It means no council, no elder, no single clan head could ever again treat him as disposable. He picked the scroll back up, turning it slowly in his weathered hands. There is danger in this, yes. Great danger. But there is also, perhaps for the first time in his life, real protection. Real power that cannot simply be stripped from him by people who decide he is inconvenient. Koharu studied her old teammate's face for a long moment. You've already decided, she said. It wasn't a question. I have decided, Sarutobi confirmed, that Naruto deserves to know the truth, and to choose his own path with that truth in hand, rather than have his future decided in a back room by three old shinobi who have already made enough decisions on his behalf without asking him. Now, quick pause here, because I want you to really sit with what's happening in this scene. This is a Hokage who sealed a demon inside a newborn to save his village, who has spent over a decade watching that same village turn its back on the boy who paid the price. And now he's being handed a piece of paper that could either save Naruto from all of that scorn forever, or paint an even bigger target on him than the fox ever did. What would you decide in his position? Bury the truth to keep the boy safe and ordinary? Or hand him the truth and let him decide what to do with a crown he never asked for? Sarutobi chose the second option. And if you want to see exactly how Naruto reacts when that scroll finally reaches him, make sure you're subscribed, because that reveal is coming very, very soon. Meanwhile, across the village, team assignments had just been read aloud, and Naruto Uzumaki was having what could generously be described as a complicated morning. Team 7, Iruka had announced, Naruto Uzumaki, Sakura Haruno, Sasuke Uchiha. Naruto's reaction had been immediate, loud, and entirely predictable. A triumphant fist in the air, a declaration that fate itself had clearly decided he and Sakura were meant to be on the same team, followed almost instantly by Sakura's equally predictable groan of despair at being stuck with Naruto the loudmouth instead of, well, anyone else. Sasuke had said nothing at all, which was also entirely predictable, and somehow still managed to make Naruto grind his teeth in irritation. By early afternoon, with the formal introductions to their new Jonin sensei still pending, Naruto found himself where he always found himself when he had time to kill and a growling stomach, perched on a stool at Ichiraku Ramen, steam curling up off a fresh bowl, Tucci behind the counter working with the easy rhythm of a man who had made this exact dish 10,000 times. Big day, huh? Tucci said, sliding a cup of barley tea across the counter. The old man never touched anything stronger behind that counter, not with kids eating there. And honestly, Naruto never even noticed the difference. Because who needs anything fancier than good tea with good ramen anyway? Official team and everything now. Yeah, well, Naruto said around a mouthful of noodles, it would have been better if I got someone other than Sasuke team. But whatever. I'm still gonna be Hokage someday, and this is just step one. I am, wiping down the counter nearby, smiled at that with the fondness of someone who'd heard this particular declaration roughly 400 times before. You say that every week, you know, because it's true every week, Naruto said, slurping down another mouthful. One day, believe it, this whole village is gonna have to call me Lord Hokage, and then, he didn't get to finish the sentence, because that was the exact moment the door curtain to Ichiraku swung open, and two armored figures stepped through it, men in the distinct dark lacquered armor of the Fire Daimyo's personal samurai guard, formal ceremonial helmets tucked under their arms, looking about as out of place in a cramped ramen stall as anyone possibly could. Tucci actually dropped his ladle. The village didn't get visits from capital samurai. Ever. Certainly not two of them, in full formal dress, standing in a ramen stand like they were looking for someone specific. We're looking for the Hokage's residence, one of the samurai said, his voice clipped and formal in a way that made the whole stall go quiet. We were told this district, Hokage towers 2 streets that way, Tucci stammered, pointing with the ladle he just picked back up off the counter. The samurai gave a curt nod and turned to leave, and as he did, his gaze passed briefly, almost carelessly, over the blonde boy sitting at the counter with a half-eaten bowl of ramen in front of him. Just a passing glance. Nothing more. Naruto had no idea, sitting there with broth dribbling down his chin, that the man's eyes had just landed, however briefly, however unknowingly on the samurai's part, on the person the entire capital court was currently in an uproar over. Weird, Naruto said, once the samurai had gone. What's capital guys doing all the way out here? No idea, Tucci admitted, still looking a little rattled. Been years since I've seen that armor in the village at all. Naruto shrugged it off in about 4 seconds flat, because he was 12, and there was still half a bowl of ramen left to finish, and whatever business the Fire Daimyo's court had going on was surely none of his concern. If only he knew. By the time the sun began sliding toward the western hills, painting the Hokage tower in long amber light, Sarutobi had made his decision, the harder decision, the one Hamura had argued against, the one that meant walking straight into a conversation he had absolutely no idea how to have. He had spent the better part of the afternoon reviewing the original compact documents himself, brought hastily under seal by the very samurai messengers who had briefly, unknowingly, glimpsed their new sovereign eating ramen 2 streets away. He had cross-referenced them against Kushina's old academy enrollment records, against clan registry archives that hadn't been touched in over a decade, against 3 separate seals of authentication from 3 separate capital officials, each more nervous than the last to be delivering this news. There was no ambiguity left. No loophole. No comfortable exit. Naruto Uzumaki, 12 years old, freshly assigned to Team 7 not 6 hours earlier, was, as of this afternoon, by the ancient and binding marriage law of Fire Country, the sole legitimate heir to the seat of Fire Daimyo. Sarutobi rolled the compact scroll back up slowly, tied it with the deep crimson cord that marked it as a document of the highest state importance, and sat with it in his hands for a long moment in the dimming light of his office. He thought about Minato, dying with a smile on his face because he trusted this village to raise his son well. He thought about Kushina, who used to laugh so loudly the whole compound could hear her, who would have found the deepest, most delighted irony imaginable in the idea that her branch of a destroyed clan's forgotten paperwork was about to make her son the most powerful civilian authority in the entire nation. He thought about Naruto himself, Loud, stubborn, endlessly hopeful despite 12 years of a village that mostly looked right through him, and wondered, not for the first time today, whether he was about to hand that boy a gift or a curse. Maybe, Sarutobi thought, rising from his desk and tucking the scroll carefully into the inner fold of his robes. It would turn out to be both. He left the tower alone, telling his attendants he wished to walk. It wasn't strictly true. Every step of that walk felt heavier than the last, but he needed the time. Needed to find the words. How does one tell a boy who has spent his whole life fighting to be Hokage that a very different throne has just fallen, unasked for and unearned in the way he'd always imagined earning things, directly into his lap? The streets of Konoha thinned as evening settled in, shopkeepers pulling down awnings, the smell of dinner cooking drifting from open windows, children being called in by name from front steps. Ordinary life, going on exactly as it always did, utterly unaware that somewhere in its midst walked an old man carrying a scroll that could rewrite the balance of an entire nation. Sarutobi climbed the narrow stairwell to Naruto's apartment slowly, each step announced by the creak of old wood, his shadow long and stretched thin under the hallway's single flickering lamp. He could hear, faintly, the tinny sound of a radio through the thin door, some cheerful jingle, completely at odds with the weight in Sarutobi's chest. He stopped in front of Naruto's door. For just a moment, one single, human moment, the third Hokage hesitated, his hand raised but not yet knocking, the sealed compact resting heavy and irreversible against his ribs. Because he knew, with absolute certainty, that whatever happened after he knocked on this door, nothing about Naruto Uzumaki's life would ever be the same again. He knocked. From inside, muffled, coming. If this is Sakura-chan, I swear I already finished the reading, Kakashi-sensei. The door swung open, and Naruto's bright, expectant grin froze halfway into place the instant he saw who was actually standing there. Old man? Naruto blinked, confusion chasing the surprise across his face. I mean, Lord Hokage. What are you doing here? Did something happen? Is it a mission? Oh man, is Kakashi-sensei already assigning us something huge? Because I am so ready. Naruto, Sarutobi said, and something in his voice, quiet, grave, utterly unlike the warm, grandfatherly tone Naruto was used to, made the boy's rambling stop cold. The old Hokage held up the sealed scroll between them, crimson cord catching the last dying light from the hallway lamp. There is something we need to discuss, Sarutobi said slowly. Something about your mother's family. Something that changes everything you believe your future is going to look like. Naruto stared at the scroll. Then at Sarutobi's face. And for the first time that day, for maybe the first time in a long while, the endlessly loud, endlessly confident Naruto Uzumaki found he didn't have a single word to say. Something about my mom's family? Naruto repeated, and you could hear it in his voice, that particular flavor of confusion a kid gets when the ground under them starts moving in a direction they never once considered. I don't, old man. I don't even really know anything about my mom's family. I didn't even know her name until a couple years ago. I know, Sarutobi said quietly. Which is precisely why this is going to be difficult to hear. May I come in? Naruto stepped back automatically, still half in a daze, and the third Hokage walked past him into the cramped little apartment, past the single unwashed ramen bowl still sitting in the sink, past the lopsided stack of shuriken practice targets leaning in the corner, past a wall calendar with today's date circled 3 times and marker because team assignments had felt like the single biggest event of Naruto's entire year up until about 90 seconds ago. Sarutobi settled himself at the small kitchen table, setting the scroll down in front of him with a care that made Naruto's stomach twist with a nervousness he couldn't quite name. Naruto sat across from him slowly, the way you'd sit down across from someone about to deliver very bad news, even though he had absolutely no idea yet whether the news was bad, good, or something in between. Naruto, Sarutobi began, what do you know about Uzushiogakure? Naruto blinked. Of every question he might have braced for, that one hadn't even made the list. The Whirlpool place? Sasuke mentioned something once, about my last name looking like the symbol on some old flak jackets. Why? Uzushiogakure was once a thriving shinobi village, Sarutobi said, closely allied with Konoha, home to the Uzumaki clan, your mother's clan, Naruto. It was destroyed during the last great shinobi war, its people scattered or killed, its name nearly erased from history entirely. Your mother survived because she had already come to Konoha as a girl. Most of her clan did not survive at all. Naruto's jaw tightened. This part, at least, he already sort of knew, in the vague, painful, half-formed way a person knows things about a family they never got to meet. Yeah. I know that part. What's that got to do with this? He nodded at the scroll. Sarutobi exhaled slowly. There was no gentle way into what came next, so he simply said it. Before Yuzushiogakure fell, its ruling families maintained several formal political alliances with allied nations, marriages arranged not out of affection, but to bind two powers together for generations. One such compact was drawn up between a branch of the Uzumaki clan and the ruling household of the Fire Daimyo. Naruto stared at him. The Fire Daimyo? Like, the guy who's in charge of the whole country? That Fire Daimyo? That Fire Daimyo, Sarutobi confirmed. The marriage the compact called for was never completed, because Yuzushiogakure was destroyed before it could take place. But under the old feudal law that governs successions in Fire Country, a properly sealed compact of that nature does not simply expire because the arranged parties never married. It passes to the next generation. And the next? Until either it is formally dissolved by both houses, which never happened, or it is fulfilled. The room went very quiet. Somewhere outside, a dog barked twice and went silent. Your mother, Sarutobi continued, was the last surviving direct descendant of the Uzumaki branch named in that compact. And you, Naruto, are her son. Naruto opened his mouth. Closed it. Opened it again. Okay, he said slowly, like a kid working through a math problem several grades above his level. But, I mean, so what? So there was some old marriage thing that never happened. That's ancient history, right? That's not, like, an actual thing anymore. It became an actual thing again 3 days ago, Sarutobi said, when the Fire Daimyo, Lord Hachiro, passed away in his sleep, leaving no direct heir of his own. He watched the exact moment it landed. Watched Naruto's face go through confusion, disbelief, a flicker of something that might have been a laugh trying to force its way out because surely this was some kind of elaborate joke, and then, finally dawning, horrified understanding. No, Naruto said. Naruto. No, hang on. Naruto shot up out of his chair so fast it scraped hard against the floor, both hands coming up like he could physically push the words back across the table. You are not about to tell me that I'm supposed to be the... He couldn't even finish the sentence. It was too large, too absurd, too much like something out of one of the fairy tales Iruka-sensei used to read to the younger academy classes. The heir to the throne of Fire Country, Sarutobi said, gently but without flinching from the words. Yes, that is precisely what the compact means, and it has already been formally confirmed by the court genealogist's office in the capital. There is no other living claimant. The line runs directly and exclusively through you. Naruto stood there in the middle of his own tiny kitchen, breathing hard, staring at the old man like he just watched him grow a second head. That's insane. That's completely insane, old man. I'm nobody. I'm the dead last of my class. I don't know the first thing about ruling a country. I can barely keep this apartment clean. You are not nobody, Sarutobi said, and there was something in his voice now that cut straight through Naruto's spiraling panic, a firmness, an old and worn patience that had steadied this exact boy through worse moments than this one. You are the son of the fourth Hokage and of Kushina Uzumaki, and whether this village has always remembered to treat you accordingly is a separate failing entirely, one I intend to speak more on later. But right now, the law does not care how clean you keep your apartment, Naruto. It cares about bloodline. And your bloodline makes you the last legitimate heir to the Fire Daimyo's seat. Now I want to pause the scene right here, because I think it's worth asking you directly, if you were sitting in Naruto's chair right now, what would you be feeling? Because I don't think it's just fear. I don't think it's just shock. I think somewhere in the back of Naruto's mind, underneath all that panic, there's a much quieter thought starting to form, a thought that goes something like, wait, if this is real, if this is actually real, then doesn't that mean nobody in this village could ever look down on him again? Keep that thought in your back pocket. We're going to come back to it. But first, Naruto's got about 100 more questions, and honestly, so would you. Naruto sank back down into his chair like his legs had simply stopped agreeing to hold him up. This doesn't make any sense, he said, quieter now, some of the panic draining into something more like exhaustion. Why now? Why today, of all days? I just got my team assigned like 6 hours ago, because Lord Hachiro died 3 days ago, and these things move at the speed they move, Sarutobi said. I have known since this morning. I have spent the entire day verifying every document, every seal, every possible alternative, hoping, I will not lie to you, Naruto, hoping there might be some error, some loophole, some other distant relative I had simply overlooked, because I understood exactly what a discovery like this would mean for a boy your age. There is no error. There is no loophole. The compact is genuine, and you are its only remaining subject. But I don't want it, Naruto said, and there was real desperation creeping into his voice now. I don't, old man, all I've ever wanted is to be Hokage. That's it. That's the whole plan. I've been working toward that since I was little enough that Irika-sensei still had to tie my headband for me. You can't just hand me a whole country instead and expect me to be okay with that. I am not here to force anything on you, Sarutobi said, and this, at least, was entirely true. The compact makes you the legal heir. It does not, and cannot, force you to accept the seat. There have been cases, rare as they are, of named heirs formally declining a succession claim. If that is what you wish to do, I will support that decision, and I will do everything in my power to protect you from whatever consequences follow it. For one brief moment, hope flickered across Naruto's face. There. An exit. A way out. Just say no, and everything goes back to the way it was supposed to be, and tomorrow he wakes up and he's still just Naruto Uzumaki, genin, future Hokage, nothing more complicated than that. Then Sarutobi kept talking, and the exit door swung shut again. But I want you to understand exactly what declining would mean, the old Hokage said. If you refuse the seat, the capital's council will be forced to search for the nearest surviving relative through other branches of Fire Country's noble houses. Distant cousins, minor lords, families with far less legitimate claims but far more political ambition. Some of those families, Naruto, have wanted a stronger hand in Konoha's affairs for a very long time. A weak or hostile daimyo could starve this village of the funding and mission contracts it depends on. Could favor rival hidden villages in trade and defense agreements. Could, in the worst case, actively work against everything Konoha stands for. And there would be nothing anyone here could do to stop it, because that is how the law works. Naruto's fist clenched slowly on the table. So it's not just about me, he said slowly. If I say no, that could actually mess things up for the whole village. It could, Sarutobi admitted. I will not pretend otherwise to make this decision easier for you. This is not a small choice, Naruto, and I would be doing you a disservice if I dressed it up as one. Silence stretched between them for a long moment. Outside, evening had fully settled over Konoha, and the single lamp in Naruto's kitchen threw long, warm shadows across a room that had never once, in 12 years, hosted a conversation of this magnitude. Finally, Naruto spoke, and his voice was smaller than Sarutobi had heard it in a long time. What would it even mean? If I said yes? What would actually happen to me? And here, right here, is where Sarutobi laid it all out. Everything. No sugarcoating, no soft edges. Because if this boy was going to make a decision this enormous, he deserved to make it with his eyes fully open. You would relocate to the Fire Capital, Sarutobi said. You would be formally invested as Fire Daimyo in a coronation ceremony attended by every noble house and allied village leader in the nation. You would preside over the court that governs trade, taxation, and military policy for the entire country, including, yes, the funding and mission contracts that keep this very village running. You would command the Fire Daimyo's personal samurai guard, separate from any shinobi authority. And you would very likely need to step back from active field duty as a genin, at least for some time, while you learned the responsibilities of the seat. Naruto's head snapped up. Wait, step back from being a genin? You mean I couldn't even be on Team 7 anymore? That would almost certainly be one of the costs, yes, Sarutobi said gently. I will not lie to you and say this comes without sacrifice. You would be gaining a great deal of power and protection that this village never afforded you as an orphan. but you would very likely be leaving behind the exact path you have spent your whole life walking toward. And there it was. The real weight of the choice, laid bare on the table between them. Because think about it with me for a second, really think about it. This isn't a simple upgrade. This isn't Naruto trading a small dream for a bigger one. This is Naruto being asked to give up Team 7, to give up Sasuke, his rival, the person who without either of them ever quite admitting it had become the measuring stick for everything Naruto wanted to become, to give up Sakura, and Kakashi, and Iruka-sensei's ramen dinners, and the entire slow, hard-won climb toward the Hokage's hat that had been the one constant, unshakable thing in Naruto's whole chaotic life. What would you do in his position? Trade the dream you've spent your whole life chasing for a crown you never asked for, if it meant real, permanent, unbreakable protection, not just for yourself, but for the village that's always overlooked you. Naruto sat with that question for a long, long moment. And then he asked the one question Sarutobi had, honestly, been dreading the most. Does this mean, Naruto said slowly, that people would finally have to actually listen to me? Like, really listen? Not just because I yelled loud enough, but because they had to? Sarutobi's chest tightened at the quiet, aching hope buried underneath that question. The hope of a boy who had spent 12 years being talked over, looked past, dismissed by shopkeepers and academy instructors and council members alike, no matter how loudly he insisted he existed and mattered. Yes, Sarutobi said honestly. As Fire Daimyo, your word would carry formal legal weight over every noble house, every merchant guild, and yes, over this village's own council, in matters of funding and policy. People who have never once had to take you seriously would be required, by law, to do exactly that. Something shifted in Naruto's face. Not excitement, not yet. Something quieter. Something that looked almost like a boy finally being handed proof that he was worth something, after wondering his entire life whether he was. I need to think, Naruto said finally. I can't, old man, this is way too big to decide in one night. I would be far more worried about you if you tried to, Sarutobi said, with the faintest ghost of his old, warm smile returning. You have 3 days before the capital formally requires an answer. Use them. Talk to whoever you need to talk to. This is your life, Naruto, and for possibly the first time, it is entirely your choice to make. Now here's where things get complicated, because word like this, even news this sensitive, even news the third Hokage desperately wanted kept quiet for exactly 3 more days, has a way of leaking. And in this particular story, it leaked exactly the way you'd expect it to, through the one person who absolutely could not keep his mouth shut about something this enormous. Iruka Umino found out the next morning, and not from Sarutobi. He found out because 2 capital samurai, the same 2 who had wandered into Ichiraku Ramen the day before without realizing who they just glanced past, showed up at the academy requesting Naruto Uzumaki's full enrollment and clan records on behalf of an urgent capital inquiry, and Iruka, being the responsible, thorough teacher he was, had immediately gone straight to the Hokage Tower to ask what in the world was going on, because nobody requests a 12-year-old's academy transcripts on behalf of the capital without a very good reason. Sarutobi, faced with his most trusted former student's teacher standing in his office with genuine alarm on his face, made the judgment call that Iruka, of all people, deserved to know the truth before rumors filled in the gaps with something far worse. Iruka sat very still through the entire explanation. Then he put his face in his hands for a solid 10 seconds. Then he looked back up at Sarutobi with an expression somewhere between disbelief and something that might have been the beginning of tears. He's going to be a daimyo, Iruka said, like he was testing whether the sentence would sound less insane out loud than it did in his head. It did not. Naruto. My Naruto. The kid who used to fail every written exam and then somehow pass every practical one out of sheer stubbornness. That Naruto, Sarutobi confirmed. He hasn't decided yet, has he? Iruka said, not really a question. He has not. He has 3 days. Iruka let out a long, shaky breath. Lord Hokage, with respect, that boy has spent his entire life wanting exactly one thing. Are you sure this is? He trailed off, unable to quite finish the sentence, because what was he even asking? Are you sure this is fair? Are you sure this is right? Are you sure taking away the one dream that's kept him going his whole life, even to hand him something bigger, is actually a kindness? I am sure of nothing, Sarutobi admitted. Which is precisely why the choice belongs to him, and not to either of us. By that afternoon, despite everyone's very best efforts at discretion, the news had done what news like this always eventually does. It spread. It spread first through the academy staff, in the particular hushed, wide-eyed way that only the most explosive gossip travels. Then it reached a few council members, who reacted with exactly the mixture of shock and calculation you'd expect from people who had spent years treating Naruto as an afterthought, and were now being forced to reconsider that position rather urgently. And by evening, in the way these things always eventually do, it reached Team 7. Sakura heard it from her mother, who'd heard it from a neighbor, who worked in the records office and had absolutely sworn herself to secrecy right up until the exact moment she hadn't. Sakura's reaction was, in order, disbelief, a demand for her mother to stop joking around, growing horror as she realized her mother wasn't joking, and then a full 10 minutes of pacing around her room repeating there is no way, there is no way, there is no way like a mantra that might somehow make it less true. She showed up at Naruto's apartment that evening practically vibrating with the need to ask him directly. Is it true? She demanded, the second he opened the door, not even bothering with a greeting first. Naruto blinked at her, exhausted in a way she'd genuinely never seen on him before, not the tired of a hard training day, but something heavier. Is what true? Don't you dare play dumb with me, Naruto. Is it true that there's some kind of, that you might be? Sakura couldn't even make herself say the word daimyo out loud, like saying it might make it more real than it already was. Naruto's shoulders sagged. Yeah, he said quietly. It's true. I haven't decided anything yet, Sakura-chan, I swear. But yeah? It's true. Sakura stared at him for a long moment, and something complicated passed across her face. Not jealousy exactly, not quite, but something adjacent to it, tangled up with genuine worry and a strange, disorienting sense of the entire world tilting sideways. Naruto Uzumaki. Outranking the Hokage. It didn't fit anywhere in her understanding of how things were supposed to work. What about Team 7? She asked, and there was something almost small in her voice now. What about? I mean, we just got assigned yesterday. What happens to us if you? I don't know, Naruto admitted. The old man said I'd probably have to step back. Maybe for good. Sakura didn't say anything for a long moment. And in that silence, much longer and more uncomfortable than either of them wanted it to be, something unspoken passed between them, the sudden, sharp awareness that whatever answer Naruto chose over the next 2 days was about to reshape both of their lives, whether either of them was ready for it or not. Sasuke heard the news last, and reacted, characteristically the least. He was in the middle of a solo training session at one of the village's outer practice grounds when Kakashi found him, delivering the news with the same flat, unbothered tone he might have used to mention a change in tomorrow's weather. Sasuke's kunai stilled mid-throw. He turned slowly. You're joking, he said. I wish I were, Kakashi said, tucking his book away for once, which alone should have told Sasuke how seriously this needed to be taken. It's not confirmed publicly yet, but it's true. Naruto has a legitimate claim to the Fire Daimyo's seat. Something flickered across Sasuke's face. Not quite surprise, because Sasuke had spent a lifetime training himself not to show surprise, but something adjacent to it. A recalculation, the dead last of the class. The loudmouth who couldn't land a basic transformation jutsu on his first 20 attempts, outranking the Hokage himself, on paper, by nothing more than an accident of birth he hadn't even known about until yesterday. That's absurd, Sasuke said finally, turning back to his target with sharp, controlled precision. Burying kunai after kunai into the wood like the motion itself might settle something in his chest that didn't want to settle. A country doesn't need a daimyo who can't even land a proper substitution jutsu. Careful, Kakashi said mildly, that absurd daimyo may soon control this village's entire funding. Sasuke said nothing to that. But his throws, for the rest of the session, were noticeably harder than usual. 2 days passed in a strange, suspended kind of quiet. The whole village not quite officially aware of what was happening, but somehow, in the way that villages always sense these things, aware that something was happening. Naruto barely slept. He walked the streets of Konoha at odd hours, looking at familiar places, the academy, the Hokage monument. Ichiraku's dark and shuttered for the night, like he was trying to memorize them, in case this was the last time he got to see them as just another face in the crowd. He talked to Irika, who listened more than he spoke, and at the end simply said, "Whatever you choose, Naruto, know that I am proud of you. I have been proud of you for a long time. That does not change, no matter what title you carry or don't." He talked to Sakura again, who admitted, quietly and a little guiltily, that some small, petty part of her had been jealous at first, and then immediately ashamed of that jealousy, because underneath it all she genuinely just didn't want to lose her weird, loud, exhausting teammate to a palace 3 days' travel away. He did not talk to Sasuke, not directly. But on the second night, he found Sasuke sitting alone on the same bridge Team 7 usually met at each morning, staring out at the water in a silence that Naruto, for once in his life, didn't feel the urge to fill with noise. "You gonna say something, or just sit there being broody?" Naruto finally asked, dropping down onto the railing beside him. Sasuke didn't look at him. "Whatever you decide," he said, "don't decide it because you think it makes you better than becoming Hokage. A crown handed to you by an accident of blood isn't worth more than a title you actually earned." Naruto blinked, genuinely startled. That was, for Sasuke, practically an essay's worth of emotional honesty. "Thanks. I think. That almost sounded like you cared, team." "Don't get used to it," Sasuke said, and that was the end of the conversation. But Naruto sat there a while longer after Sasuke left, turning those words over in his head, because underneath the usual Sasuke iciness, there had been something true in them worth holding on to. On the morning of the third day, Naruto stood in Sarutobi's office, having barely slept, having talked to nearly everyone who mattered to him, having turned the decision over so many times in his head it had worn smooth like a river stone. "I've decided," he said. Sarutobi set down his pipe. "I'm listening." "I don't want to give up on being Hokage," Naruto said slowly, choosing each word with more care than Sarutobi had ever seen him use. That's still the dream deep down. But you said it yourself, old man. If I say no, some noble family who doesn't care about this village could end up with that seat instead. And if that happens, and something bad comes out of it, and I could have stopped it just by saying yes." He shook his head. "I couldn't live with that. Not if I'm gonna call myself someone who protects this village." He looked up, and for once, there was no bravado in his expression at all, just a boy who had made about the hardest choice of his life, and was doing his best to sound steady about it anyway. "I'll take the seat," Naruto said. "I'll be Fire Daimyo." Sarutobi studied him for a long moment, feeling something complicated settle in his chest. Pride, and grief, and a fierce, protective hope all tangled together. "You understand," he said quietly, "that this changes everything. Team 7. The Chunin Exams. Every plan you've ever made for your own life." "Yeah," Naruto said. "I know." He managed a small, crooked smile, the first real one Sarutobi had seen from him in 3 days. "Guess I'm gonna have to find a new way to make people respect me. Turns out I already found one. Just wasn't the one I was expecting. If you want to know what happened next, go ahead and guess before I tell you, because I think you're going to be surprised either way." Word could not be contained after that. Within a day, the formal decree was drafted, signed, and sealed by the capital's court, and a herald was dispatched to Konoha to make the announcement fully, publicly official, because a succession of this magnitude, once decided, does not stay a quiet secret between a handful of trusted people. It becomes a matter of state. The herald arrived in the village square on the 4th morning after Lord Hachiro's death, flanked by 4 samurai in full ceremonial armor, and read the succession decree aloud to a crowd that had gathered mostly out of confused curiosity about why capital officials were suddenly standing in the middle of their village. By the ancient and lawful marriage compact between the ruling house of the Fire Daimyo and the Uzumaki clan of Yuzushiogakure, the herald announced, his voice pitched to carry across the entire square, and by the confirmed and singular bloodline claim of the last surviving heir, it is hereby declared that Naruto Uzumaki, son of Kushina Uzumaki, shall ascend to the seat of Fire Daimyo, effective upon formal coronation at the capital. The square went dead silent. And then, somewhere near the back of the crowd, Naruto Uzumaki, still in his same battered orange jacket, standing at a window above the square because he genuinely hadn't been able to make himself go down and stand in the crowd for this, watched his own name echo off the walls of the only home he had ever known, and felt, for the very first time in his entire life, the full and terrifying weight of what it meant to matter to an entire nation, whether he wanted that weight or not. News like this doesn't stay contained to one team for long. By the time the herald's voice had finished echoing off the buildings surrounding the village square, half of Konoha's shinobi population under the age of 20 had already heard some version of the story, most of them wildly exaggerated, a few of them somehow still not exaggerated enough to capture how strange the truth actually was. Kiba Inuzuka heard about it from his sister Hana, who heard about it from a Jonin friend who'd been standing close enough to the square to catch the herald's announcement word for word. He came skidding into the training ground where his team was supposed to be doing formation drills, Akamaru barking excitedly at his heels, looking like a boy who'd just been told the sky had changed color overnight. "You are not gonna believe this," Kiba announced, loud enough that Shino actually looked up from the beetle he'd been quietly observing on his sleeve, and Kurenai paused mid-instruction with the patient, slightly weary expression of a Jonin sensei who had learned to brace herself whenever Kiba started a sentence that way. "Believe what?" Hinata asked softly, though something in her expression suggested she might already have half heard a rumor of her own. "Naruto," Kiba said, practically vibrating with the need to say it out loud. "Naruto Uzumaki. He's gonna be the Fire Daimyo. Like, the actual Fire Daimyo. The guy in charge of the whole country." Silence. Shino's beetle, sensing the sudden stillness in its host, crawled a half-inch further up his sleeve. "That's not possible," Kurenai said slowly, in the careful tone of an adult testing whether a claim was worth taking seriously before reacting to it. "Where did you hear that?" Hana heard it from Ginma, who was literally standing right there when the herald read it out. "It's not a rumor, sensei, it's like, official. There was a whole decree and everything." Hinata had gone very quiet, her hands twisting together in front of her the way they always did when she was trying to process something too large to hold steady. Naruto-kun. A daimyo. She had spent years quietly, secretly, watching him from a distance, admiring the way he refused to quit no matter how many times the world knocked him down, and now the world, apparently, was handing him an entire country instead. Some small, unworthy part of her wondered, with a flush of guilt immediately following the thought, whether this meant he would be even further out of reach than he'd always seemed. But underneath that flicker of doubt was something warmer, steadier, pride. A fierce, quiet pride that the boy who'd never given up on himself was finally about to be seen the way he deserved. "That's," Shino said slowly, adjusting his sunglasses in the particular way he did when his carefully controlled composure had been genuinely rattled, "a significant development." "A significant development," Kiba repeated, staring at him. "Shino, buddy, the dead last of our class outranks the Hokage now. That's not a significant development. That's the single weirdest thing that's ever happened in this village. And this is a village where a snake guy tried to eat people's souls once." Across the village, in a training ground on the opposite side of Konoha, Team 10 was having a considerably more chaotic version of the exact same conversation. "No way," Ino Yamanaka said, for what was probably the 6th time in 90 seconds, hands planted on her hips as she stared at her teammates like one of them might suddenly admit this was all an elaborate joke. "No way, no way, no way. Naruto? Forehead's Naruto? The one who used to fail every written exam and still somehow show up wearing that ugly orange jacket like it was some kind of statement." "It's true," Choji said around a mouthful of chips, though even he had slowed his chewing considerably in the face of news this large. "My dad heard it straight from a council attendant. Said there's some old marriage law thing from before any of us were born. Uzumaki blood, apparently. This is..." Shikamaru started, and then trailed off entirely, staring up at the clouds with the particular stillness he got when a problem was so large and so complicated that even his famously lazy brain couldn't help but engage with it fully. "This is actually going to be a massive headache," he finished eventually. "A headache?" Ino stared at him. "Shikamaru, do you understand what you just said? Naruto is going to be running the entire country. He's 12, He still owes me money from that bet we made in the academy about who'd land the transformation jutsu first. That's exactly why it's a headache, Shikamaru said, sitting up slightly. Think about it. Right now, Konoha's whole funding structure, every mission contract with the capital, every trade agreement that keeps this village running, all of that answers, at least on paper, to whoever sits on that throne. If it's someone reasonable, fine, nothing changes day to day. But if it's someone the council doesn't know how to predict, someone who has personal history with half the shinobi in this village already, he shook his head slowly. That's not simple. That's not simple at all. You say that like it's a bad thing, Choji pointed out. Naruto's our friend. Wouldn't it be good, having a friend running the country? Shikamaru was quiet for a moment. Depends, he said finally, on whether the council and the clans see it that way too. Or whether they see a 12-year-old Jinchuriki suddenly holding leverage over every single one of them, and decide that's a problem that needs solving. Ino's triumphant grin faltered slightly at that. Because Shikamaru, annoyingly, troublingly, had a point. Not every reaction to this news was going to be excitement. Some of it, a lot of it, probably, was going to be fear. And fear, in Shikamaru's long experience of watching his father navigate clan politics, had a way of curdling into something considerably less friendly than fear all on its own. Team Guy received the news somewhat later, mid-training, and their reactions split along predictably distinct lines. This is the most youthful development I have ever witnessed, Rock Lee bellowed, punching the air with such enthusiasm that a nearby training post actually splintered slightly under the shockwave of his fist connecting with empty air a foot beside it. Naruto-kun has shown us all that the flames of hard work and determination can carry a person to heights beyond even the Hokage's chair. Truly, this is proof that anyone can rise, no matter where they start. It's proof of a marriage contract from before we were born, Lee, Tenten said dryly, though there was a genuine note of astonishment underneath her dry tone. It's not exactly the same as pulling yourself up through hard work. The spirit of the achievement remains equally inspiring, Lee insisted. Niji Hyuga said nothing for a long moment, arms crossed, expression unreadable in the way it so often was. Privately though, and this was something Niji would never have admitted aloud, not at this point in his life, not before everything he still had left to learn about fate and bloodlines and the things people were and weren't born into. Privately, the news sat strangely with him. He had spent years believing certain things were simply fixed, that the main house ruled the branch house because blood decided such things, that some doors opened only for people born on the correct side of a line drawn generations ago. And now here was Naruto Uzumaki, an orphan with no family name anyone respected, no clan backing, nothing but stubbornness and a fox sealed in his gut, being handed the single highest civilian seat in the entire nation, because of a bloodline nobody, including Naruto himself, had ever known existed. If that could happen, Niji thought slowly, turning the idea over with the same careful suspicion he turned over everything that threatened his understanding of how fate worked, then what other doors might actually not be as fixed as he'd always assumed. Might Guy, watching his team process the news, allowed himself a single booming laugh of pure delight. Ha! The flames of youth burn in unpredictable directions, my students. Let this be a lesson. The future belongs to those who refuse to accept the limits others place on them. Now here's something worth pointing out, because I think it says a lot about exactly how big this moment really is. Every single one of these reactions, Kiba's shock, Hinata's quiet pride, Shikamaru's political anxiety, Lee's booming enthusiasm, Niji's private reconsideration of everything he thought he understood about fate, every single one of them is really about the same underlying question. What does it mean when the person everyone wrote off turns out to be sitting on more power than anyone in the room? Because that's really what this arc has been building toward from the very first chapter. Not just what if Naruto got a crown instead of a headband, but what happens to everyone else's assumptions, everyone else's carefully built hierarchies, when the person at the very bottom of the ladder turns out to have been standing on a completely different ladder the whole time? Keep that question in mind. It's about to get a lot more complicated, because we haven't even gotten to Team 7 yet, and Team 7's reaction is the one that actually matters most. Kakashi Hatake received the official reassignment notice from the Hokage's office on the same morning the herald made the public announcement, and read it twice through before setting it down on his kitchen table with the particular slow, deliberate care of a man trying very hard not to react too visibly to something that had genuinely rattled him. Team 7, reduced to 2 active genin, pending reassignment of a third member or restructuring of squad composition, effective immediately upon the departure of Naruto Uzumaki for the Fire Capital. He'd read a lot of strange mission briefs in his career. This was, without question, the strangest. He found Sakura and Sasuke waiting for him at their usual bridge that morning, and something about the atmosphere told him immediately that they already knew. Sakura standing with her arms wrapped around herself in a way that suggested she'd barely slept. Sasuke leaning against the railing with his usual careful neutrality, doing a slightly worse job than normal at hiding what was underneath it. "You've heard," Kakashi said, not really a question. "The whole village has heard, Sensei," Sakura said. Is it actually official?" "Is he really?" "It's official," Kakashi confirmed. "The decree was read this morning. Naruto has formally accepted the succession." Sakura's shoulders sagged, though whether from relief that it was finally confirmed rather than left hanging in painful uncertainty, or from the fresh grief of that confirmation itself, even she probably couldn't have said for certain. "So that's it, then," she said quietly. "Team 7's just over." Before it even really started. "Not necessarily over," Kakashi said, though even he sounded less than fully convinced by his own reassurance. "The Hokage is still working out exactly how this transition will be handled. But I won't lie to either of you. It is very likely that Naruto will need to step back from active genin duty for the foreseeable future. Possibly permanently." Sasuke said nothing, staring out at the water below the bridge with an intensity that suggested his mind was somewhere else entirely. Running calculations, probably. The way Sasuke always processed things he didn't quite know how to feel about directly. "Has anyone talked to him about the exam?" Sakura asked suddenly. "The Chunin Exams. Iruka-sensei mentioned we might be nominated soon, all 3 of us." "Is he still going to be able to?" "No," Kakashi said, and this time there was no softening the answer at all. A sitting Fire Daimyo cannot also be enrolled as an active genin candidate in a Chunin exam administered under his own nation's authority. The conflict of interest alone would be unworkable, setting aside the fact that his responsibilities will require his presence at the capital, not in an exam arena. He paused. "Naruto will not be taking the Chunin exams with you." The words landed heavier than Sakura expected. She'd known, on some level, since the moment she'd heard the news, that this was probably true. But hearing it said flatly out loud, by their own sensei, made it land with a finality that the rumors and half-formed dread of the last few days hadn't quite managed. "Then who?" she started. "The Hokage's office is already working on reassigning a substitute genin to fill the 3rd position on your team, at least through the duration of the exams," Kakashi said. "I don't have a name yet, but you will still be nominated, if the 2 of you and your new teammate are ready. This doesn't have to end your shot at the exams. It just means Naruto won't be standing beside you when you take it." Sasuke finally spoke, his voice flat and controlled in the way it always was when he was working hard to keep something else entirely out of it. "Some substitute," he said. "Great. You don't sound thrilled," Kakashi observed. "I'm not," Sasuke said simply. And then, after a pause just long enough that Kakashi almost let the silence stand, "He was supposed to be the one pushing me. Not some replacement I've never trained with." It was, for Sasuke, about as close to an admission of genuine loss as either of his teammates had ever heard him make. Naruto found Sasuke and Sakura together at the bridge later that afternoon, and the conversation that followed was, by anyone's standards, one of the hardest of his short life. He was dressed differently already, not fully in capital formal wear yet, that would come later, but a modest, high-collared traveling robe had replaced the familiar orange jumpsuit for this particular visit, a compromise the capital's attendants had insisted on given how quickly word was spreading. It looked wrong on him. Sakura noticed it immediately, and something in her chest ached at the sight, like watching a friend already halfway transformed into someone else before her eyes. "Hey," Naruto said, awkward in a way that was almost unbearable to watch on someone normally this loud and unfiltered. "So, you guys heard, obviously." "Obviously," Sakura said, trying and failing to keep her voice light. "I wanted to tell you both myself," Naruto said. "Before it got, official. I should have come find you the second I decided, instead of letting you hear it from the whole village square announcement thing. Sorry. That wasn't fair to either of you. You don't have to apologize for accepting a throne, Naruto, Sasuke said, though there was less bite in it than his usual tone carried. Yeah, well, I still feel bad about it, Naruto said. He rubbed the back of his neck, looking, for just a moment, exactly like the kid he'd been 3 days ago, before any of this had started. Kakashi-sensei tell you the exam thing? Sakura nodded slowly. You're not gonna be able to take it with us. Yeah, Naruto said quietly. Believe me, that's the part that actually sucks the most. Everything else, I don't know, it's big and scary and I still don't totally understand half of what I'm walking into. But the exam, he shook his head. I'd been picturing that stupid exam since before we even got our headbands. And now I'm gonna be sitting in some palace signing trade papers while you two go take it without me. For a moment, none of them said anything. The water moved slowly beneath the bridge, unbothered. The way it always had been through every argument and reconciliation this exact spot had witnessed since Team 7 first started meeting here. We'll do it for you, then, Sakura said finally, surprising even herself with how firmly it came out. Whoever they put in as our third, we'll make it through the exam, and we'll do it well enough that you'll have something to actually be proud of, even if you're not standing there with us. Naruto blinked at her, something raw and grateful flickering across his face. Sakura-chan, don't get sappy about it, she said quickly, blinking a little too fast herself. Just, don't disappear on us completely, okay? Just because you're gonna be busy running a country doesn't mean you get to forget you still have a team. I could never forget you guys, Naruto said, and for once, there wasn't a shred of his usual exaggeration in it. It was just true, plainly and simply. Sasuke pushed off from the railing he'd been leaning against, walking over to stand directly in front of Naruto for the first time since the conversation started. He studied him for a long moment, really studied him, the way Sasuke rarely bothered to look at anyone. Don't let it change you, Sasuke said finally. What? The crown, Sasuke said. The nobles, the court, whatever they're going to try to mold you into once you're surrounded by people who've spent their whole lives learning how to be exactly the kind of proper and polished that you've never once bothered to be. Don't let them turn you into someone I wouldn't recognize. Naruto stared at him, and something in his chest loosened slightly, because underneath the words, buried under Sasuke's usual careful distance, was something that sounded almost like it might be worry, actual worry. About him. I'm still gonna be me, team, Naruto said, managing something close to his old grin. Bet on it. I'll be the weirdest Fire Daimyo this country's ever had. And everyone's just gonna have to deal with it. Good, Sasuke said simply, and turned to walk away before the moment could stretch on long enough to become anything more openly sentimental than that. But he paused after a few steps, not quite turning back. When the exam's done, he added, I still expect to fight you someday. Crown or no crown. You got it, Naruto said, and meant it more than he'd meant almost anything else in the past 3 exhausting days. That evening, Naruto sat with Iruka at Ichiraku's one last time before his formal relocation to the capital was scheduled to begin. The two of them sharing a quiet meal, barley tea instead of anything stronger, because that was simply the only kind of drink Tucci had ever served behind that counter, kid or adult, in a silence that felt less like awkwardness and more like two people trying to hold on to something they both knew was ending, even as something else entirely was beginning. You've grown up so fast, Iruka said eventually, staring down into his tea like it might have more to say than he did. I'm still 12, sensei, Naruto pointed out. Nothing about me actually got older in the last 3 days. I know, Iruka said. That's exactly what worries me. You're still 12, and in a few weeks you're going to be sitting across a table from nobles who've spent their entire lives learning how to outmaneuver each other in ways you've never had to think about. Yeah, well, Naruto said, poking at his noodles without much appetite for once, guess I'll just have to learn fast. Iruka reached over and, in a rare gesture for a man who mostly showed his affection through scolding and quiet reassurance rather than anything physical, put a hand briefly on Naruto's shoulder. You are not walking into that palace alone, Naruto. Whatever they try to make you into, whatever they expect from you, you remember who you actually are underneath all of it. The boy who never gave up. No matter how many times this village failed to give him a reason to keep trying. That boy is the one that palace is getting. Not some polished replacement they're going to try to carve out of you. Naruto looked up at him, something thick in his throat that had nothing to do with the ramen. Thanks, sensei, he said quietly. For, everything. Since the beginning. Go be the strangest, most stubborn daimyo this country has ever had, Irika said, managing a smile even as his own eyes went a little too bright. I have a feeling you're going to need every bit of that stubbornness where you're going. He wasn't wrong. Because 2 days later, when Naruto arrived at the fire capital for the first time in his life, exhausted from travel, still wearing the plain, modest traveling robes the capital attendants had insisted on, utterly unprepared for the scale and grandeur of the palace compound rising up out of the cedar forest ahead of him, he was about to walk directly into a room full of people who had absolutely no intention of making this easy on him. The fire capital's palace was unlike anything Naruto had ever seen. Konoha, for all its charm, was built low and practical, a village of wood and stone shaped around function first. The capital was different. Sweeping tiled roofs curved up toward the sky in elegant, deliberate arcs. Wide stone courtyards stretched between formal buildings connected by covered walkways. Lanterns lit even in daylight along paths clearly designed to impress rather than merely to guide. Everything here had been built to communicate power, tradition, permanence, the exact opposite of the scrappy, lived-in warmth Naruto had grown up surrounded by. He felt, walking through the outer gates flanked by his new samurai escort, smaller than he had in years. Captain Renji, a broad-shouldered, weathered samurai officer assigned as the head of Naruto's personal guard, his armor immaculate, his expression carefully, professionally neutral, met him just inside the gates. Lord Naruto, Renji said, with a formal bow that made Naruto's skin crawl slightly with how wrong it felt to have an adult bowing to him. Welcome to the capital. The court has convened this afternoon specifically to receive you. I would advise, he paused, looking Naruto over with the barely concealed assessment of a man measuring exactly how much work lay ahead of him. A certain degree of caution in how you present yourself. Several of the regional lords in attendance today are not enthusiastic about this succession. Great, Naruto muttered. Real warm welcome. They will test you, Lord Naruto, Renji said bluntly. Today, and for many days after. I would suggest you let them. Naruto frowned. Let them? Why would I want that? Because a lord who has never been tested, Renji said, is a lord no one respects when the testing truly matters. Better they test you now, in a formal court session, than later, when the stakes involve armies rather than words. Naruto absorbed that in silence as they walked, robes swishing awkwardly around legs used to a much more practical jumpsuit, toward the towering doors of the main audience hall. Through those doors, he could already hear the low murmur of dozens of voices, nobles, officials, regional lords, all gathered to formally receive their new, 12-year-old sovereign. He straightened his shoulders, the same way he always had before every exam, every mission, every moment in his life when the whole world seemed determined to expect him to fail. All right, Naruto muttered to himself, mostly to steady his own nerves. Let's see what you've got. The doors swung open. The hall inside was enormous. Vaulted ceilings, banners bearing the Fire Country crest hanging in long rows down either side, and at the far end, an elevated dais where, until recently, Lord Hachiro had sat for over 4 decades. Dozens of nobles and officials filled the hall in ordered rows, their formal robes a sea of muted, dignified colors. Every single face turning at once to watch the boy in plain travel robes walk the long length of the hall toward the empty seat waiting for him. Naruto felt every one of those stares like physical weight. This was so different from the stares he was used to back in Konoha, not the dismissive, faintly hostile glances he'd grown up under, but something colder, more calculating. These people weren't looking at him like he was beneath their notice. They were looking at him like they were trying to determine exactly how much of a problem he was about to become. A tall, thin noble near the front of the assembly, Lord Katsuo, head of one of the largest merchant houses in the eastern provinces, as Naruto would later learn, stepped forward before Naruto had even reached the dais, cutting cleanly across the formal silence that was supposed to precede any address to the new daimyo. Forgive my haste, Lord Katsuo said, in a tone that made it very clear he was not, in fact, asking forgiveness for anything, but I believe several of us gathered here would appreciate clarity before any formal proceedings continue. Is it truly the court's position that a 12-year-old ninja from a hidden village, with, I am given to understand, no formal education in statecraft, economics, or governance whatsoever, is to be seated as sovereign over the whole of Fire Country? Murmurs rippled through the hall. Naruto's jaw tightened, but he held his tongue, remembering Renji's advice from moments earlier. Let them test him. The bloodline claim has been formally verified by this court's own genealogist office, came a familiar, steady voice from near the dais. Sarutobi, who had traveled ahead to be present for exactly this moment, standing now with the calm authority of a man who had survived far worse political storms than this one. The law does not require an heir to already possess statecraft, Lord Katsuo, only legitimate blood. Your objection, however sincerely felt, does not alter the compact's validity. With respect, Lord Hokage, Lord Katsuo said, turning his attention deliberately toward Naruto instead, as if to make a point of addressing the boy directly rather than his elder defender. The law may grant the seat. It does not grant competence. Perhaps the young lord would care to demonstrate some small measure of the judgment his new office will require of him, starting, perhaps, with this. He gestured, and an attendant stepped forward bearing a scroll, which Lord Katsuo unrolled with a flourish before the assembled court. A petition, he announced, from the farming villages of the eastern Kaminari district, requesting relief from this year's grain tax following a poor harvest. I myself would advise against granting it. Precedent matters, and leniency shown once invites petitions from every district in the country. What say you, Lord Naruto? Would you grant this relief, or uphold the tax as written? Every eye in the hall turned to him. Naruto felt his heart pound, the sudden, crushing awareness that whatever he said next was about to be picked apart by every noble in this room, weighed and measured and used to decide exactly how seriously, or how dismissively, they were going to treat him from this moment forward. But underneath the panic, something steadier stirred. Because this, at least, wasn't actually so different from things he already understood. He might not know the first thing about grain taxes or trade precedent, but he knew, better than almost anyone in this hall ever could, exactly what it felt like to be the one struggling at the bottom while people with more power decided his fate without ever once asking what he actually needed. How bad was the harvest? Naruto asked. Lord Katsuo blinked, clearly not having expected a question in return. Severe enough that the district petitioned formally, which villages rarely do without genuine hardship behind it. Then you grant it, Naruto said simply. Obviously. Obviously? Lord Katsuo repeated, a thin, condescending edge creeping into his voice. Precedent, young lord, is not so simple a matter. If you grant relief every time a district complains of hardship you invite. I didn't say every time, Naruto cut in, and something in his voice had shifted, no longer quite so nervous, something firmer taking its place. The same stubborn conviction that had carried him through every exam, every fight, every moment his whole life when people told him he couldn't do something. I said this time, because you just told me the harvest was bad enough that they actually had to ask. People don't come begging for help unless they really need it. I know that better than probably anyone standing in this room. So if they're asking, it's because things are already hard enough. Making it harder just cause you're worried about precedent doesn't protect anything. It just makes people suffer now so maybe, someday, fewer people ask for help later. That's not smart. That's just cruel with extra steps. Silence rippled through the hall. Lord Katsuo's mouth opened, then closed, visibly recalculating. There is also, Sarutobi added smoothly, stepping into the pause with the ease of a man who recognized exactly the moment to reinforce a point rather than let it hang unsupported, a long-standing precedent for exactly this kind of relief in years of genuine crop failure. Lord Hachiro granted similar relief to the western provinces some 11 years past, under comparable circumstances. I was unaware of that precedent, Lord Katsuo admitted stiffly, some of the wind visibly gone from his sails. Then it's settled, Naruto said, straightening slightly, feeling something click into place in his chest that hadn't been there a moment before, the small, fierce satisfaction of having actually won an argument that mattered, in a room that had expected him to lose it. Grant the relief. A long moment passed. And then, from somewhere in the back of the hall, quiet at first and then spreading, came the sound of murmured approval, not universal, not from everyone, but from enough of the assembled nobles that the mood in the room shifted, if only slightly. Lord Katsuo bowed stiffly, retreating back into the ranks of the assembly without further comment. Though the look he shot Naruto on the way back was calculating rather than cowed, the look of a man reassessing an opponent he'd assumed would be easy, and finding, to his visible displeasure, that the assessment had been wrong. Naruto let out a slow, shaky breath once the noble had stepped back, and glanced sideways at Sarutobi, who gave him the smallest, proudest ghost of a smile. That, Renji murmured from just behind him, low enough that only Naruto could hear, was well handled, Lord Naruto. Felt like passing a pop quiz I didn't study for, Naruto muttered back. You may find, Renji said, the faintest hint of dry amusement creeping into his otherwise carefully professional tone, that this entire seat is exactly that. Every single day. But not every test that day was going to be quite so easily won with a good argument and a bit of stubborn conviction, because as the formal session drew toward its close, and Naruto allowed himself the smallest flicker of relief that the worst of it might be over, an attendant approached quietly from the side of the hall, murmuring something to Renji that made the captain's expression shift, just slightly, into something more guarded. Lord Naruto, Renji said quietly, leaning down. There is a private matter requiring your attention. A representative has arrived requesting an audience, unscheduled, and unannounced through the usual channels. Who? Naruto asked. He gave no name, Renji said, and something in his tone had gone carefully flat in the specific way trained soldiers go flat when they are trying very hard not to let their unease show. Only that his business concerns the ongoing Chunin Exams in Konoha, and that it was, in his words, a matter the new daimyo would find quite interesting. Naruto felt something cold settle low in his stomach, some instinct honed by years of surviving on the streets of a village that had never fully trusted him whispering that this, whoever this was not simply another noble come to test his patience over grain taxes. Send him in, Naruto said, straightening despite the unease crawling up his spine. The side door of the hall creaked open, and a tall, pale figure stepped through it, moving with an unhurried, almost lazy grace that immediately set every nerve in Naruto's body on high alert, a presence that felt, somehow, entirely wrong in a room built for civil administration and grain tax disputes. And that's exactly where we're going to leave things today. The figure that stepped through the side door moved like he never once in his life needed to hurry for anything. Tall, pale, dressed in the plain gray robes of a minor traveling merchant, nondescript enough that in any other room, in any other context, nobody would have looked at him twice. But Naruto's instincts, sharpened by years of surviving on the edges of a village that had never fully trusted him, prickled the instant the man crossed the threshold. Something about the way he held himself, something about the too careful stillness of his expression, like a mask worn just slightly loose. Forgive the intrusion, young lord, the man said, bowing with just enough formality to seem respectful and just enough looseness to seem faintly mocking at the same time. I represent certain trading interests with ties to several villages hidden and otherwise. I understand congratulations are in order. You said you had business about the Chunin exams, Naruto said, not bothering with pleasantries. Beside him, he felt Renji shift almost imperceptibly closer, one hand resting with deliberate casualness near the hilt of his blade. Straight to business. I admire that in a ruler so young. The merchant's smile widened, just slightly too wide, just slightly too long held. I merely wish to offer my congratulations in person, and to note, purely as an observer of these things, how curious it is that the Hidden Leaf's most promising genin now sits above its own Hokage in matters of state. Such an unusual arrangement invites unusual attention, don't you think? From villages who might wonder whether Konoha's strength has just doubled, or whether it has, in fact, been split in two. Naruto's jaw tightened. There was something underneath the words, something testing, probing, like a man pressing gently on a wound to see how much it hurt. If you've got an actual point, Naruto said, make it. I've got a whole line of nobles waiting behind you who at least have the decency to argue about grain taxes instead of talking in riddles. Something flickered behind the merchant's eyes, amusement, maybe, or something colder wearing amusement's shape. Very direct. Very refreshing, for a court such as this. He bowed again, deeper this time. No point beyond congratulations, young lord. I merely wish to see, with my own eyes, what kind of ruler the Hidden Leaf has produced. I believe I have seen enough. He straightened, already turning to go. Do enjoy your exams, Lord Naruto. I hear this year's will be particularly memorable. And then he was gone, back through the side door, moving with that same unhurried, gliding grace, before Renji could even fully close the distance between them. Captain, Naruto said quietly, the moment the door shut, get someone to follow him. Now, Renji was already moving, snapping 2 fingers toward a pair of guards stationed near the hall's outer wall, who peeled off after the departing merchant without a word. But Naruto already knew, with the same cold, sinking certainty that had settled in his gut the moment the man walked through the door, that whoever they sent would come back with nothing. Empty corridors, a vanished trail. Maybe a plain gray robe discarded in some forgotten alcove, and nothing else. He was right. The guards returned 20 minutes later, exactly as expected, reporting that the merchant had simply disappeared somewhere between the outer gate and the merchant district, as though he'd never been there at all. Now, quick pause here, because I want to make sure you're tracking exactly what just happened, because it's subtle. That wasn't just some noble come to grumble about taxes. That was reconnaissance. Someone, and I think most of you already have a very strong guess who, just walked directly into the Fire Daimyo's own palace, on the very first day of Naruto's reign, to look him dead in the eye and measure exactly what kind of threat, or opportunity, he represented. And that matters enormously for what's coming, because up until this point in the story we've been asking what happens to Naruto. Starting right now, we need to start asking a much scarier question. What happens to everyone else's plans, once the board itself has changed shape? Let's find out exactly whose plans we're talking about. Several days' travel away, in a hidden lair carved deep into the rock beneath a nondescript stretch of border forest, a pale, snake-eyed man sat cross-legged before a low table, listening to a report delivered by the very same figure who had, not 4 hours earlier, stood inside the Fire Daimyo's own audience hall wearing another man's face entirely. He is sharper than I expected, the disguised scout reported, his voice returning, once alone with his master, to its natural register, flat, cold, faintly amused. Not educated, not polished, but sharp in the particular way that stubborn animals are sharp. He handled the merchant lord's baiting well enough during the session, and he suspected something was wrong the moment I entered. Ordered pursuit immediately. Orochimaru's lips curved into something that was not quite a smile. Interesting, he murmured, more to himself than to his subordinate. The boy has instincts, then. Untrained, unrefined, but present. He turned a small, curved blade slowly over in his long fingers, watching the low lamplight catch along its edge. This complicates matters considerably. You mean the invasion plan, my lord? I mean everything, Orochimaru said. Consider the board as it stood a month ago. A Chunin exam, hosted by Konoha, attended by dignitaries from every allied village, including, crucially, the Fire Daimyo himself, who traditionally observes the finals from a place of honor. A vulnerable old man, past his prime, surrounded by ceremony and tradition and very little else. Killing the Hokage during that chaos, discrediting the village that failed to protect either its leader or its guest of honor, that was always the heart of the plan. He set the blade down with deliberate care. Now the Fire Daimyo's seat is filled by a 12-year-old Jinchuriki with battle instincts sharp enough to order immediate pursuit of a stranger he'd known for 4 minutes. The stakes of that same final ceremony have shifted considerably, wouldn't you agree? You believe he will attend, my lord? The exams themselves? I believe, Orochimaru said slowly, that a boy who has spent his entire life dreaming of nothing but becoming Hokage will not sit quietly in a palace 3 days' ride away while his own team competes for advancement without him. He will find some excuse, some justification his counsel cannot refuse. And when he does, the not-quite smile widened, thin and cold, we may find ourselves with an opportunity considerably larger than the one we originally planned for. Killing a Hokage cripples a village's leadership for a season. Killing, or capturing, a sitting Fire Daimyo during that same chaos, that cripples an entire nation's ability to fund and support its hidden villages for years. The board has not turned against us, Kabuto. It has simply grown a far more valuable piece than we first accounted for. Kabuto, for it was, of course, Kabuto, his natural face resettling as he dropped the last traces of his borrowed disguise, adjusted his glasses with a faint, considering nod. Then the plan changes. The plan, Orochimaru corrected, adapts. As all good plans must, when the pieces on the board are foolish enough to rearrange themselves without asking permission first. If you're new to this channel, or if it's just been a while since you've seen this particular villain in action, that's Orochimaru, one of the most dangerous rogue shinobi in the entire Naruto universe, currently in the middle of orchestrating an invasion of Konoha time to strike during the Chunin exam finals. In the original story, his target was always the third Hokage. In this story, his target list just got a very unexpected new addition, and Naruto has absolutely no idea any of this is happening yet. Right now, he's got much smaller problems to deal with, like figuring out which fork to use at dinner, and trying not to fall asleep during a 3-hour briefing on regional trade tariffs. Let's check back in with him. The days that followed Naruto's first formal court session settled into something that might, on the surface, have looked almost like a routine, except that every single element of that routine was completely, dizzyingly foreign to the boy trying to live inside it. Mornings began before dawn, which alone was enough to make Naruto seriously reconsider every decision that had led him here. A tutor named Lord Toshiyuki, a thin, exacting man with ink-stained fingers and absolutely no patience for excuses, arrived promptly at first light each day to drill him on Fire Country's administrative structure, the regional lords and their territories, the merchant guild hierarchies, the treaty obligations Fire Country maintained with Wind Country, with the Land of Water, with a dozen smaller nations Naruto had never once had reason to think about in his entire life. Again, Toshiyuki said, not for the first time, tapping the map spread across the low table between them. The eastern provinces answer directly to the capital treasury. The northern provinces maintain semi-autonomous taxation rights under the old accords. Which of these is currently petitioning for relief, Lord Naruto? The eastern ones, Naruto said automatically, then paused. Wait, no, that was the ones from the first day. The grain thing. Isn't there also a northern petition now too? There is, Toshiyuki said, something that might, on a more generous face, have been the faintest flicker of approval. You retained that correctly. Continue. Naruto rubbed his eyes, already exhausted despite the sun barely having cleared the horizon. Back in Konoha, mornings had meant training, sparring, the immediate physical satisfaction of getting stronger one bruise at a time. Here, mornings meant maps and ledgers and words like semi-autonomous taxation rights that made his brain feel like it was being slowly folded in on itself. But, and this was the part that surprised him most, in the quiet moments when he actually let himself think about it, it wasn't entirely unlike training. It was just a different kind of muscle, and Naruto Uzumaki, whatever else people had always said about him, had never once in his life been someone who gave up on building a muscle just because it was hard to strengthen. Afternoons brought formal audiences, a rotating parade of regional lords, merchant guild representatives, and court officials, each bringing petitions, disputes, and requests that Naruto was slowly, painfully learning to weigh with something more than just gut instinct alone, though gut instinct, he was discovering, still counted for more than most of the court seemed to expect from him. Evenings, more often than not, meant formal dinners, an entirely different kind of battlefield, one with its own bewildering rules about seating arrangements and proper address and which topics were and weren't appropriate to raise over a meal. It was at one of these dinners, 6 days into his new life at the capital, that everything nearly went catastrophically wrong. The dinner in question was a mid-sized formal affair, nothing like the full court session of his first day, but still attended by perhaps 24 nobles and officials, all gathered in one of the palace's smaller banquet halls to formally welcome several visiting dignitaries from Wind Country's diplomatic delegation. Naruto sat at the head of the long table, dressed in the increasingly familiar discomfort of formal robes, high-collared, full-sleeved, cut in the modest, deliberately plain style the capital's tailors had settled on for him after the first day's more elaborate ceremonial garments had proven, in Naruto's own blunt assessment, impossible to actually move in without tripping over myself. The female attendants and visiting dignitaries around the table, Naruto had noticed early on, all dressed in the same manner regardless of station. Long sleeves, trousers, high modest necklines, nothing ever cut or draped in a way that stood out from the court's otherwise uniformly conservative dress code. It had taken him exactly 0 time to adjust to that particular expectation, mostly because he never once in his life paid much attention to fashion anyway. Course after course arrived, simple, elegant dishes of grilled fish, seasoned vegetables, rice prepared 3 different ways, chicken glazed with a sauce Naruto privately decided was almost as good as Ichiraku's broth, though he would never have said that out loud in present company. Cups of tea and chilled fruit juice circulated instead of anything stronger. The capital kitchens, Naruto had learned, kept strict service for all formal functions, a policy apparently instituted generations back and never once revisited. Naruto approved of that particular tradition without reservation. He never had much use for anything besides a good cup of tea anyway. Conversation drifted between the visiting Wind Country delegation and several of the capital's senior officials. Trade routes, border patrol agreements, minor diplomatic pleasantries that mostly went over Naruto's head, though he was getting steadily better at nodding along at the right moments and asking the occasional genuine question that made Toshiyuki, seated a few places down the table, look faintly, grudgingly impressed. It was during the 4th course, a light, chilled soup, garnished delicately, set before Naruto by one of the palace's junior serving staff with the same practiced, silent efficiency as every other dish that evening, that something small and wrong caught at the edge of Naruto's attention. He couldn't have said, in the moment, exactly what it was. Some tiny hitch in the serving girl's movement, a half-second too much hesitation before she set the bowl down, a flicker of something in her expression, gone almost before Naruto registered it, that didn't match the calm, practiced neutrality every other server in the room wore like a uniform. Years of instinct, the same instinct that had kept him alive through academy bullying, through hostile stares, through a childhood spent constantly, quietly alert for the next unkindness the world might throw at him, made Naruto's hand pause over his spoon before it ever touched the bowl. He glanced sideways, casually, like he was simply looking for the salt, and caught Rinji's eye across the room, where the captain stood at his customary post near the hall's side entrance. Something in Naruto's expression must have communicated more than he intended, because Rinji's posture shifted instantly, subtly, from formal watchfulness into something sharper. Something wrong, Lord Naruto? Asked Lord Osamu, one of the senior court officials seated nearby, noticing the pause. Not sure yet, Naruto said quietly, keeping his voice light, casual, even as every instinct in his body screamed at him to be anything but. He looked down at the soup in front of him, perfectly innocent looking, pale and fragrant, and utterly ordinary. And then, very deliberately, he did something none of his etiquette tutors had ever prepared him for. He pushed the bowl an inch away from himself, and picked up, instead, the small serving ladle resting beside the tureen at the center of the table, dipping it directly into the shared pot the soup had been portioned from. Lord Naruto, Toshiyuki said, a note of alarm creeping into his normally unshakable composure. That is hardly proper table conduct for. Just a second, Naruto said, and tasted a small spoonful directly from the shared tureen. The same pot every other guest at the table had been served from, still perfectly fine, still exactly as it should be. Then, moving fast enough that half the table barely registered what he was doing until it was already done, he reached over and took the smallest possible taste from his own individual bowl instead, the one the junior server had set specifically in front of him, and only him. His tongue registered it half a second before his brain fully caught up, a faint, bitter undertone beneath the soup's delicate seasoning, subtle enough that anyone not actively looking for it would never have noticed at all. Wrong. Distinctly, unmistakably wrong. Naruto spat the spoonful back into his napkin immediately, heart hammering, adrenaline flooding through him with the same sharp clarity he'd felt in 100 sparring matches back home. Guards, he said, and his voice had changed completely, no longer the slightly awkward, still adjusting boy from a moment ago, but something harder, colder, the voice of someone who had spent years learning to survive threats other people never had to think about. Someone poisoned my bowl. Not the pot, just mine. The hall erupted into instant chaos. Rinji was moving before Naruto even finished the sentence, 2 additional guards flanking him, sweeping toward the kitchen entrance with the kind of speed that left no doubt about how seriously they were taking the accusation. The junior server who had delivered the bowl had already gone pale as parchment, backing toward the wall with her hands raised, stammering something about not understanding, about having only carried the tray from the kitchen exactly as instructed. She's not the one who did it, Naruto said quickly, some instinct telling him immediately that the terrified girl in front of him was exactly what she appeared to be, a scared kitchen worker, not a trained assassin. Someone gave it to her already prepared. Find whoever handed her that specific bowl. It took the better part of an hour, and a thorough, tense sweep of the palace kitchens, before the truth emerged. A kitchen assistant, a man who had joined the palace staff only 3 weeks earlier, with forged references that, under closer scrutiny, dissolved into nothing at all, had vanished entirely sometime in the chaos following the discovery, leaving behind nothing but an empty vial, carefully hidden behind a loose stone in the kitchen's rear pantry, that tested positive for a slow-acting toxin capable of mimicking the symptoms of natural illness over the course of several days. Slow. Deniable. Designed not to kill outright in the middle of a dinner where suspicion would immediately fall on the obvious culprits, but to weaken, gradually, until a young and inexperienced daimyo simply fell mysteriously, tragically ill, the kind of death that raises quiet questions in court corridors for years, but never quite enough proof to point cleanly at anyone at all. Sarutobi arrived at the capital the following morning, summoned urgently the moment word reached Konoha, and found Naruto sitting alone in one of the palace's smaller private chambers, staring at nothing in particular, the previous night's adrenaline long since drained away into something heavier and more unsettled. You are unhurt, Sarutobi said, more statement than question, though relief was evident in every line of his weathered face as he took the seat across from Naruto. Yeah, Naruto said quietly. Barely tasted it before I spat it out. Renji says I probably wouldn't even have gotten sick from that little, but you noticed it at all, Sarutobi said. That is no small thing, Naruto. Trained shinobi with years of field experience have missed slower, subtler attempts than that one. Guess growing up the way I did teaches you to notice when somebody's trying to mess with you, Naruto said, with a hollow attempt at his usual humor that didn't quite land, not even for himself. Never thought I'd be grateful for that. Kinda messed up, huh? Sarutobi was quiet for a long moment, watching the boy in front of him, 12 years old, 6 days into ruling an entire nation, having just narrowly survived his first assassination attempt with nothing but instinct honed by a childhood of neglect standing between him and a slow, deniable death. I will not lie to you, Sarutobi said finally. This will not be the last attempt made on your life, Naruto. Not the last, and likely not the most dangerous. Whoever ordered this, whether a disgruntled noble unwilling to accept your succession, or something far more dangerous entirely, has now revealed a willingness to act. That door, once opened, rarely closes again on its own. You think it's connected, Naruto said slowly, something clicking into place from the back of his mind. To that merchant guy. The one from my first day. The one who disappeared before anyone could catch him. Sarutobi's expression sharpened. Tell me everything about that encounter again. In detail this time. I want every word, he said, exactly as you remember it. Naruto did, and watched Sarutobi's face grow steadily more grave with every detail, the too wide smile, the pointed comment about the Chunin Exams being particularly memorable this year, the unnerving, gliding way the man had moved, like his body wasn't quite settled into the shape he was currently wearing. When Naruto finished, Sarutobi sat in silence for a long moment, jaw tight, eyes distant with the particular focus of a man assembling a very unwelcome picture out of scattered pieces. Old man? Naruto said eventually. You look like you just figured out something bad. I fear I may have, Sarutobi said slowly. There is a man, a former student of mine, in fact, from many years ago, who has spent the better part of a decade working against this village from the shadows. He has a particular fondness for infiltration, for disguise, for patient, long-planned schemes that unfold over months or years rather than days. If he has taken a personal interest in you, Naruto, if he sees your succession as an opportunity rather than merely a curiosity, he shook his head grimly. Then this poisoning may be only the very beginning of a much larger design. Great, Naruto muttered. So not only do I gotta learn 100 boring trade rules and figure out which fork to use, now I gotta watch out for some snake creep who wants me dead too. I am afraid so, Sarutobi said, not unkindly. Which is precisely why I intend to strengthen your protection considerably, effective immediately. And why, he added more quietly, I believe it is time you and I discussed, quite seriously, What role you intend to play once the Chunin exams begin. Because if my suspicions are correct, Naruto, those exams may prove considerably more dangerous than a simple test of skill for your former teammates. And I do not believe, whatever the court protocols say about a sitting daimyo's presence at such events, that you intend to sit quietly here at the capital, while that danger unfolds 3 days' ride away. Naruto looked up at him, and something steady and resolved settled into his face. The same stubborn determination that had carried him through every impossible odds his whole life had ever thrown at him. No, Naruto said. I don't. The morning the Chunin exam nominations were formally posted outside the academy, Konoha buzzed with the particular electric energy that only comes once a year. Clusters of genin crowding around the board, some grinning, some pale with nerves, sensei standing back with arms crossed, and the quiet, watchful pride of teachers about to send their students into something genuinely dangerous for the first time. Sakura found her name first. Then Sasuke's, right beside it, exactly where it should be, and then a third name she didn't recognize at all. Hiroshi Tanaka, she read aloud, frowning at the unfamiliar characters. Team 7. Who's Hiroshi Tanaka? That would be me, said a voice behind her, and Sakura turned to find a boy about their age, quiet-eyed, dark-haired, dressed in the plain gray and brown of a genin who clearly hadn't spent much time worrying about how he looked, standing with his hands tucked into his pockets, and an expression that seemed to be bracing for disappointment before anyone had even said a word to him yet. You're our replacement, Sasuke said, not quite a question, arms crossed as he studied the newcomer with the flat, assessing look he gave most things that weren't immediately impressive. I guess that's one way to put it, Hiroshi said, with a faint, self-deprecating shrug. Kakashi-sensei picked me up from Team 9 about 4 days ago. I know I'm not. I know I'm filling in for somebody with a pretty big reputation right now. I'm not trying to replace anybody. Just trying not to slow you two down. There was something quietly honest in the way he said it that took a little of the edge off Sakura's instinctive wariness. She'd half expected some cocky transfer trying to prove himself against Sasuke's shadow, or worse, someone resentful about being parachuted into a team that clearly hadn't wanted a third member in the first place. Instead, Hiroshi just looked tired, and a little nervous, and entirely too aware of exactly how strange this whole arrangement was for everyone involved. You any good? Sasuke asked bluntly. Solid at tracking and traps, Hiroshi said. Nothing flashy. My sensei used to say I think like water finding the low ground, not the fastest way through, just the way that actually works. He glanced between them. I know that's probably not what either of you are used to on this team. It's fine, Sakura said before Sasuke could say something less generous. We'll figure it out together. We don't really have another option, right? Hiroshi managed a small, grateful smile. Right. Kakashi appeared behind them a moment later, hands in his pockets, single visible eye crinkled in its usual unreadable half-smile. Good. Introductions are handled. I trust the three of you can manage to function as a team with, roughly 2 weeks of preparation time before the exam actually begins. 2 weeks? Sakura echoed, alarmed. Should be plenty, Kakashi said, entirely unhelpfully, and wandered off with his book already back out, leaving his newly reformed team standing there to sort out the rest for themselves. 3 days' travel away, in a modest private study just off the Fire Capital's main audience hall, Naruto Uzumaki sat with a scroll unrolled in front of him that he had read probably 15 times in the past hour alone. The formal nomination roster for this year's Chunin exam, forwarded to him, as a courtesy, because as sitting Fire Daimyo he technically had oversight authority over any major shinobi event conducted within his nation's borders. Sakura Haruno. Sasuke Uchiha. Hiroshi Tanaka. His own name was nowhere on it, of course. He'd known that. He'd known it for weeks now, ever since Kakashi first told him flat out that a sitting daimyo simply could not also stand as a genin candidate in an exam run under his own authority. But knowing something and actually sitting with it, alone, in a quiet study 3 days away from the only home he'd ever known, watching his own team's name go up on a roster without him on it, those turned out to be two very different kinds of knowing entirely. You've read that scroll enough times to have it memorized, came Renji's voice from the doorway, the captain of his guard leaning against the frame with his arms crossed. watching Naruto with the particular careful patience of a man who'd been assigned to protect someone considerably younger than any of his previous postings and was still working out exactly how much of a soldier's stoicism to apply to the job, versus something gentler. Yeah, well, Naruto said, not looking up. Not much else to do with my evening besides read the same 12 words over and over. You could join me for the evening drill, Renji offered. Might take your mind off it. Naruto glanced up. The sword thing? The sword thing, Renji confirmed, with the faint, dry amusement he'd developed for exactly how unimpressed his young charge remained by weeks of formal weapons instruction. You are, whether you enjoy it or not, expected to at least carry yourself creditably with a blade befitting your station. Ceremonial functions require it. And, he added more seriously, given recent events, a daimyo who can actually defend himself, rather than merely look like he can, strikes me as considerably more valuable than one who cannot. Naruto sighed, rolling the scroll back up and setting it aside with visible reluctance. Like putting down something painful was somehow still easier than looking away from it entirely. Fine. Better than sitting here staring at a list I'm not on. The training yard behind the palace's east wing was smaller than the grand formal courtyards visitors saw on their way in. A modest square of raked gravel and worn wooden practice posts, chosen deliberately for privacy rather than impression. Renji handed Naruto a wooden practice sword, the same one they'd used for the past several sessions, and took up a matching one himself. Stance, Renji said, and Naruto obediently settled into the low, balanced position he'd been drilled into over the past week, feet shoulder width. Blade held at the ready angle Renji insisted was correct despite Naruto's repeated observation that it felt kind of stiff. No offense. It is stiff, Renji agreed, circling slowly. Sword forms are built on discipline, not flexibility. Very different from whatever chaotic taijutsu your academy taught you. Hey, my taijutsu works fine, Naruto protested, parrying Renji's first testing strike with more force than technique, sending a jarring shock up through his wrists. It works, Renji allowed, stepping back to reset, because you compensate for poor form with raw stubbornness and an apparently endless well of energy. That is not a strategy available to most people, Lord Naruto, and it will not serve you in a formal duel where your opponent expects proper technique and will exploit the absence of it. They ran through the forms again, strike, parry, reset, strike, parry, reset, the rhythm of it slowly, gradually starting to settle into something Naruto's body could actually hold on to. The same way any physical skill eventually clicked into place if he just kept throwing himself at it long enough. It wasn't ninjutsu. It wasn't the wild, improvisational scrapping that had carried him through academy sparring matches and the disastrous, glorious mess of his wave country mission. But it was, he was slowly coming to realize, a different kind of discipline entirely. One built on precision instead of chaos, on patience instead of stubbornness alone. You're improving, Renji observed, after Naruto managed to land a clean, controlled strike against the practice post for the first time all week. Slowly. But improving. Only reason I'm sticking with it, Naruto admitted, breathing hard, is cause it's the closest thing to actual training I get to do anymore. Everything else is maps and ledgers and remembering which noble hates which other noble. He lowered his practice sword, wiping sweat from his brow. Feels good to actually move again, even if it's not the same. Renji studied him for a long moment. You miss it, he said. Not a question. Course I do, Naruto said quietly. Being a shinobi's the only thing I've ever been good at. And now my whole team's about to go take the biggest test of their lives. And I'm stuck here learning sword forms and grain tax law instead. For what it's worth, Renji said, setting his own practice sword aside, I don't believe learning to rule a nation makes you any less a shinobi, Lord Naruto. It simply means you are being asked to be more than one thing at once. Most people spend their whole lives being permitted to be only one thing. You've been handed the considerably harder task of being several things simultaneously, and being good at all of them. Naruto turned that over for a long moment, some of the tightness in his chest easing slightly at the thought. Guess that's one way to look at it, he said finally. Still wish I could just be there when they take the exam, though. Even just to watch. Perhaps, Renji said carefully, that is a conversation worth having with the Hokage directly, rather than simply resigning yourself to it. Now I want to pause here for a second, because I think there's something really worth noticing in this scene, something that's easy to miss if you're just watching for the plot to move forward. Naruto isn't losing himself in this new role. He's not becoming some polished, distant noble who's forgotten where he came from. He's finding a different way to be exactly who he's always been, stubborn, determined, unwilling to just accept that simply how things are is a good enough reason to stop trying. That matters a lot for what's coming. Because in just a few more scenes, that stubbornness is about to collide head-on with an entire council of advisors who are absolutely certain they know what's best for him. Back in Konoha, the 2 weeks leading up to the exam passed in a blur of preparation for Team 7, training sessions that started rocky, as any newly formed team's training sessions tend to, and gradually smoothed into something workable, if not yet fully seamless. Hiroshi, true to his own modest self-assessment, turned out to be exactly as advertised, not flashy, not overwhelming in raw power the way Sasuke was, or dogged in improving the way Sakura had become, but quietly, reliably clever in a way that started to earn him genuine respect from both of his new teammates. "Watch this," he said one afternoon, during a training exercise meant to simulate tracking an evasive target through the forest. While Sasuke charged straight ahead, relying on speed and sharp eyes to close the distance, and Sakura carefully catalogued every possible hiding spot with methodical precision, Hiroshi simply crouched at the tree line, studying the ground. "There," he said after a moment, pointing to a barely visible disturbance in the underbrush. He doubled back. "Here, see the leaf pattern?" Went northeast instead of continuing on the obvious path. Sure enough, redirecting their pursuit along the subtle trail Hiroshi identified cut nearly 10 minutes off what would otherwise have been a much longer chase. "How'd you even notice that?" Sasuke said, more curious than dismissive for once. "Practice," Hiroshi said with a shrug. "I'm never gonna outfight either of you head-on. So I got good at not needing to." Slowly, over those 2 weeks, something that actually resembled a functioning team began to take shape, different from what Team 7 had been with Naruto, quieter in some ways, missing the chaotic, stubborn energy that had always been Naruto's particular contribution to any group dynamic, but real nonetheless. Still, there were moments, quiet ones, unguarded ones, where the absence made itself known. Sakura, catching herself mid-sentence, turning to say something to a teammate who wasn't there anymore, at least not in the way he used to be. Sasuke, standing at the bridge some mornings a few minutes longer than necessary, like some part of him was still waiting for a loud, familiar voice to come barreling around the corner late as always. "Think he's watching?" Sakura asked once, during a rare quiet moment between drills, staring off in the vague direction of the fire capital, 3 days' travel away. "Like, do you think he even gets to know what's happening with the exam at all?" "Probably gets reports," Sasuke said. "Doesn't mean it's the same as being here." "No," Sakura agreed quietly. "Guess not." She was right to wonder, because at that very moment, Naruto was, in fact, doing exactly that, poring over every scrap of official correspondence from Konoha that crossed his desk, extracting whatever fragments of information he could about the exam's preparation, however dry and bureaucratic the official reports made it sound. "Preliminary written examination scheduled for the 14th, he read aloud to Sarutobi, who had traveled to the capital for one of his regular check-ins on both Naruto's progress and the increasingly tense political undercurrents surrounding the succession. Second stage survival trial to follow in the designated forest training ground. Third stage tournament format, location and date to be finalized based on second stage attrition. You have been reading every logistics report Konoha's Chunin Exam Committee has filed," Sarutobi observed, not without some amusement, "with considerably more attention than you have shown any of Lord Toshiyuki's actual trade lessons this week." "That's 'cause the trade lessons are boring, old man," Naruto said, only half joking. "This is my team. Course I'm gonna pay more attention to this." Sarutobi's expression softened slightly. "I understand the impulse, Naruto. Truly I do. But I must ask you directly, before this goes any further, what is it you actually intend to do with this information? You cannot compete. That door has closed, and closed for good reason." "I know I can't compete," Naruto said. I'm not trying to sneak in and take the test somehow, old man, give me some credit. He hesitated, turning the scroll over in his hands. "I just want to be there. Watching. Even if I can't be in it, I want to see them go through it. That's gotta be allowed, right?" Nothing in any of these rules says the Fire Daimyo can't show up and watch an exam happening in his own country. Sarutobi considered this carefully, weighing the request against everything else currently occupying his thoughts. The poisoning attempt, the unsettling visit from a stranger who very likely served the man Sarutobi feared most, the mounting sense that something larger and more dangerous was quietly assembling itself just beyond the edges of what either of them could clearly see yet. There is precedent for a daimyo's attendance at significant exam finals, Sarutobi said slowly. Traditionally, as an honored observer during the tournament stage specifically, the earlier trials are considered too chaotic and unstructured for formal dignitary attendance. If you wish to attend, the finals would be the appropriate and expected moment to do so. Naruto's face lit up immediately. So I could go? For the last part, at least? It would require formal approval from your council here at the capital, Sarutobi cautioned, and I suspect, given recent events, considerable additional security arrangements besides. This is not a simple matter of you deciding to travel wherever you please anymore, Naruto. Every movement you make now carries weight and risk that it never carried before. I get that, Naruto said. But I want to try anyway. Please, old man. It's my team. I have to at least see them get there, even if I can't be standing next to them when they do. Sarutobi studied him for a long moment, and something in the boy's earnest, stubborn expression reminded him, not for the first time, painfully and fondly, of Naruto's father at roughly the same age. That same refusal to simply accept distance from the people who mattered to him, no matter what obstacles stood in the way. I will raise the matter with your council, Sarutobi said finally. I cannot promise the outcome, but I will raise it. The council session that followed, 3 days later, did not go entirely as smoothly as Naruto had hoped. Absolutely not, Lord Katsuo said immediately, the same merchant lord who had tested Naruto so pointedly on his very first day in court, apparently having lost none of his skepticism in the weeks since. The young lord has survived one assassination attempt already in this very palace. You propose sending him traveling, publicly, to attend an event where his former village's greatest enemies may well be gathering? This is not caution, Lord Naruto. This is recklessness dressed up as sentiment. It's my team, Naruto said, working hard to keep the heat out of his voice, remembering Renji's repeated advice about controlled composure mattering more in council than raw conviction alone. I'm not asking to fight in the exam. I'm asking to watch the finals, same as any daimyo before me apparently has the right to do. Any daimyo before you, another council member pointed out dryly, was not simultaneously the Jinchuriki of the nine-tailed fox, nor the target of a poisoning attempt within his first week of rule. The circumstances are hardly comparable. Then increase security, Naruto said. Bring however many guards you think is enough. I'm not saying go with nothing. I'm saying don't just lock me up in this palace and pretend that's the same thing as keeping me safe. That's not safety. That's just a nicer word for a cage. The room went quiet at that. Sarutobi, seated in his customary place near the dais, watched the exchange with careful, measured attention, saying nothing yet, waiting to see how this particular test played out on its own. With respect, young lord, said Lord Isamu, one of the more moderate voices on the council, speaking gently but firmly, your safety is not merely a personal matter any longer. It is a matter of state. Should something happen to you during this journey, something we failed to adequately prepare for, the consequences extend far beyond your own well-being. They touch the stability of the entire nation's succession. I get that, Naruto said, and there was real weight in his voice now, the practiced weight of weeks spent learning, slowly and painfully, how to argue like someone who actually understood the stakes rather than simply reacting on instinct. I get that this isn't just about me anymore. But that cuts both ways, right? If I'm gonna spend the rest of my life sitting behind these walls every single time something might go wrong, then what's even the point of being daimyo at all? What's the point of having all this authority if I'm too scared to ever actually use it for something that matters to me? He looked around the table, meeting each skeptical gaze in turn, something steady and unshakable settling into his posture, the same stubborn conviction that had carried him through every impossible test his whole life had ever thrown at him. My team is walking into that exam without me, Naruto continued. They're doing it because of a choice I made, a choice that was the right one. I still believe that, but it cost them something too. The least I can do, the very least, is show up and watch them finish what I couldn't be there to start with them. That's not recklessness. That's just not abandoning people who never once abandoned me. Silence stretched through the hall. Sarutobi allowed himself the faintest ghost of a proud smile, watching a boy who, only weeks ago, would have simply shouted his way through an argument like this, now instead building a case with the same stubborn heart, wrapped now in considerably more discipline. Lord Katsuo was the one who finally broke the silence, his expression grudging but no longer entirely dismissive. Extensive security. A full contingent of the palace guard, traveling ahead to secure the route and the venue itself. No unscheduled deviations from an approved itinerary. And, he added, with the air of a man extracting one final concession before conceding the larger point, attendance restricted strictly to the tournament finals, as precedent dictates, not the earlier, less structured trials. Naruto's face broke into a grin, his first genuinely unguarded smile in what felt like weeks. Deal. If you're keeping track, and I know a lot of you in the comments have been counting, that's Naruto winning his second real political battle in this story, and this one mattered a whole lot more to him personally than a grain tax dispute ever could. Slowly, chapter by chapter, we're watching this kid figure out how to actually wield the power he's been handed, instead of just being overwhelmed by it. But here's the thing. Remember what we learned back in a hidden lair a few scenes ago. Remember what Orochimaru said about the finals being an opportunity considerably larger than the one we originally planned for, if Naruto found some way to attend. He just found that way. And Orochimaru's spies, quietly embedded in places nobody at that council table had thought to check, were about to make absolutely certain their master heard about it before the ink was even dry on the travel authorization. Back in Konoha, the day of the written examination arrived, and Team 7, Sakura, Sasuke, and Hiroshi, filed into the crowded exam hall along with dozens of other genin teams from villages across the shinobi world, the tension in the room thick enough to taste. The exam proctor, a sharp-eyed, scarred man who introduced himself simply as Ibiki, laid out the rules with the flat, menacing precision of a man who clearly enjoyed watching nervous genin squirm. 10 questions, a point deduction system so harshly weighted that a single failed question could disqualify an entire team, and a final 10th question deliberately withheld until the very end of the exam period. Its true nature left ominously, deliberately unclear. Sakura, true to her academic strengths, tore through the first 9 questions with disciplined efficiency. Sasuke, more strategically, recognized quickly what half the room eventually caught on to, that the real test wasn't the impossible written questions at all, but whether a team was clever and subtle enough to gather answers without getting caught. Hiroshi, for his part, turned out to have exactly the right skill set for this particular challenge, his quiet, careful observation skills making him remarkably effective at tracking which nearby teams seemed to have legitimate ways of acquiring correct answers, and which subtle methods might be borrowed without detection. By the time Ibiki delivered his infamous final ultimatum, accept the 10th question and risk being permanently barred from ever taking the Chunin exam again if you answered wrong, or refuse and forfeit your chance this year entirely, Team 7 sat together, having survived the gauntlet through a combination of Sakura's genuine knowledge, Sasuke's sharp opportunism, and Hiroshi's careful, unassuming observation. Sasuke's hand went up without hesitation, refusing to back down, and the rest of Team 7 followed his lead. Ibiki's grin, when he finally revealed the truth, that the real 10th question had never been about the written content at all, but about whether they possessed the courage to accept an impossible risk without flinching, spread slow and satisfied across his scarred face. "You pass," he said. And for the first time in weeks, Sakura, Sasuke, and Hiroshi felt something like a real team, forged not through Naruto's chaotic energy this time, but through the same hard-won trust every version of Team 7 eventually had to build for itself. Word of the written exams results reached the Fire capital within 2 days, carried by the same official courier channels that had been keeping Naruto informed throughout the entire process. He read the report with a fierce, proud grin splitting his face. Team 7 passed, all 3 of them, moving on to the second stage. "They did it," he said, practically bouncing with excitement as he showed the report to Renji. "Without me, and they still did it. Did you doubt they would?" Renji asked, amused. "No," Naruto admitted. "But it's still awesome to actually see it happen, you know? Like they're really doing this." But the good mood didn't last long, because barely an hour after that report arrived, a second message reached the palace. This one considerably less official, delivered by a breathless, dust-covered courier who had ridden through the night rather than wait for the next scheduled dispatch. Sarutobi read it first, alone in his temporary quarters at the capital, and felt something cold settle deep in his chest as the words sank in. Reports from Konoha's intelligence division indicate probable infiltration of the Chunin exam by disguised operatives linked to the rogue shinobi Orochimaru. Confirmed sighting of an operative matching the description provided by Lord Naruto during his account of the incident on the day of succession. Recommend immediate reassessment of security protocols for all remaining exam stages. He found Naruto in the training yard, still practicing sword forms with Rinji in the fading evening light, and the boy's excitement from earlier faded instantly the moment he saw the expression on the old Hokage's face. What happened? Naruto said, already tense, already bracing for something bad. Sarutobi held out the message wordlessly, and Naruto read it twice through, his stomach twisting cold at the confirmation of exactly the fear that had been sitting quietly at the back of his mind ever since that unsettling encounter in the audience hall weeks ago. It's him, Naruto said quietly. The merchant guy. He's really working for. It appears so, Sarutobi said grimly. Naruto's hands tightened around the scroll. Sakura and Sasuke are already in the middle of the exam. They're already in danger, and they don't even know it. Konoha's security forces are being alerted and reinforced as we speak, Sarutobi said. This is being handled, Naruto. I want to go now, Naruto said, cutting him off, all the careful, patient diplomacy he'd been practicing for weeks suddenly burning away entirely beneath something far more immediate and fierce. Not at the finals. Now. Today. I'm not sitting here waiting for the appropriate stage while my team's walking into some trap that guy's been setting up since before I even had my coronation. Naruto, I mean it, old man. Naruto's voice had gone hard, unwavering, the same stubborn, immovable conviction that had carried him through every impossible fight of his entire life. I don't care what the council agreed to. I don't care about proper protocol or precedent or any of that. Sakura and Sasuke are in danger, and I am not going to sit in a palace 3 days away memorizing trade routes while it happens. Sarutobi studied him for a long, long moment, the fierce, unshakable resolve in the boy's eyes, so utterly unlike the careful, measured negotiator who had won over a skeptical council just days earlier, and yet somehow entirely consistent with him too. Because underneath every lesson Naruto had learned in these past weeks, underneath every ounce of new patience and discipline he built, the same fundamental truth remained exactly as it always had. Naruto Uzumaki did not abandon the people who mattered to him. Not for a crown. Not for anything. Then let us go and inform your council, Sarutobi said finally, something resolute settling into his own weathered features, that their new daimyo intends to travel to Konoha immediately, and that this time, whether they approve of the timing or not, he does not intend to wait for their permission.